cable from this point to here so that they could pull the cable back. The reason we chose to go in over here, this was the narrowest part of the lake. So,
To give
At
you a
that
little
time-
backstory, hold on a second. There was a building there also to the
Can you
right.
hear us?
Let me see that.
Okay.
There was a building here at the time, you could kind of see the footprint. Before we did any diving, we did our safety talks. We talked, hey, if nobody goes in the water without your buddy, we're gonna come up at 500 PSI. If we have any issues, we had Luther General right there. So we did our talk sitting and literally hanging on a pickup
on the back of the truck. And what happened is that Dan Miller came over and talked to us, and at that time, all four of us had gotten together, and just like Dan said, we talked about decompression sickness, we talked about what to look for, signs and symptoms. Nobody was to descend alone. We were supposed to come back up at 500 pounds, and that was what the nearest decompression chamber was at Lutheran General. So we said, okay, this is how you're going to get on Lutheran General if something happens. So we had it all mapped out. At that point, Dan Miller came over and said, we need somebody to swim it across. And I actually said to him, I have the whole document, a 5-page document that I wrote up the night of the accident. I had told him that wasn't what we were hired for, because I didn't think it was right for us to swim that length and then immediately go diving. I thought that was a little bit dangerous at the time. So Steve Macko volunteered. Now, side note to this, Steve Macko also went home sick the duty day before that I hadn't known about, or I didn't know why he went home sick.
That's the first I heard of.
That's in my notes. When I asked him why he went home sick, he said it was a stomach ailment. He also had just come from the doctor that morning, and I had no idea what his medical history was at the time. I was just another diver, blue shirt on the team. I had no idea anything like this was going on in his personal life. So Steve volunteered to go. So I remember Mike and Dan had gone to start setting up all of our gear over in this location here is about where we were setting up our staging area. And I turned to Steve and I said, Steve, we don't have to do this. And he said, don't worry about it, I'll be all right. And I said, are you sure? And he goes, Mike, I'll be fine. And I said, okay. So if anybody knew Steve, there was really no arguing with him about anything. So Dan and Steve went over to the far side, and then Steve with his suit on, fins,
Dry suit.
he had his dry suit on, and he swam back across the lake on his back over to the other side. When he got to the other side, we had already set up all of our gear in our staging area. Everything was ready to go at that location there, and Steve did not look winded. He did go to his truck because he drove also. Myself, I drove, and Steve drove. He took he grabbed his chair out of the truck, and he was sitting there while the rest of us were all getting ready to go. So my experience at the time, I was an open water instructor at the time, and I was always one of those guys that was trying to get everybody dressed and get everything ready to go. So we got Dan and Mike dressed, ready to go. They went in, and then they started to, you want to go?
Yeah, we kind of had some pre-planning done, knowing that there was a lot of hazards there. There was some boulders. We knew there was big boulders in there. We thought that there was going to be some steel rebar and things like that in there. So the talk was being just to be slow, be careful, just because of all that there. The fountain had been pulled in for the winter time, and the red is really kind of simulating the big electrical cables that are there. So we thought in order to pull that cable or that fountain all the way to the center, we had to lift up the cables and kind of float it out there. Okay.
So we had gone through to different dive shops, and we had gotten 100-pound lift bags. At the time, I was affiliated with a dive shop in Streamwood called Sea Lion. They gave me a bunch of bags. There was a dive shop up in Hoffman that gave me some bags too. And the plan was that big red dot is actually where the fountain was actually sitting in this location right here, because the electric came from this building that was right there. So they would drag the fountain, which was on floats, across, well, that's where Steve swam from.
So that's where he swam from.
And the fountain was to get to this area here. And they dragged it across from shore. But what was happening is, what they would do is, as they were dragging it, the electric cord would get hung up, because this is an old quarry. It's an old gravel pit. So it would get hung up on the rocks as we were pulling it across. So that was why we had to have the lift bags that would lift up the power cable and the anchor line for it. That's why we had to do that to get it across. So we had gotten it to a certain point, to about this location here. Now you can see,
And they had that cable pulling it across, so they had it and they walked it over and they were pulling it to get it kind of somewhere in the center here.
so at this point, Dan and Mike enter the water because Steve and I are still getting dressed. Steve and I got these guys dressed. They go in the water. Now it's time for us to start getting dressed. So they go in and they start doing their thing in the water, getting it all ready. Steve's still sitting in the chair. I start getting dressed. I had my BC had all the weight in it, and you guys know we're so overweighted, and we were. Before that, Steve actually had a new type of harness on. It was like suspenders that he
For
had on
weight belt.
for his weight belt. So we were talking about that and how easy would it be to get off, and he said it's really easy to get off.
He actually demonstrated it.
Yeah.
Flipped it up and flipped it and it fell down.
And it worked really well. So I commented that my stuff was pretty heavy. He helped me get my stuff on. I then entered the water and was hanging out on shore as Steve was getting his stuff on. I asked him if he needed help and he said no. So I entered the water so I didn't get overheated.
So Mike Buckle and I entered the water, and I was on the right side, he was on the left side. And as you can imagine, we had a little bit of visibility all up until we took the cables and we started moving them, right? And then it kind of blew up with all of the soot and stuff. So we put a couple, and obviously this isn't to scale, but we put a couple lift bags on there. We started lifting it up. That was freeing the fountain enough to where they can start pulling it. And at that point, they kind of got it around this way at this point, okay? So they got it up to do an entire loop. At the time, Steve was also really worried about the cables getting hooked up. He kept commenting about the cables getting caught up at the shoreline. So that might have played a part in this incident also. You want to finish, or you want me to go
Yeah,
in?
so at this point in time, go back to.
Back up.
So Dan and Mike had put in the airbags, and at this point, Dan had about 200 pounds, that's what I have in my notes. You had 200 pounds in his tank, and Mike Buckle had 600 pounds in his tank. They were surface
Actually,
swimming
it was
back.
Reversed. I had 600, he had.
Is that what it was?
Yeah.
So they were kind of coming in, and as I was going out, now this is where
Mike had a
the
free
accident
flow.
happens.
He had a free flow, that's why his bottle was so low.
You're right. He had a free-flowing regulator, his octopus. I'm in the water. I start swimming out on my back. I'm watching Steve, and I'm trying to look over my shoulder, and I see Mike and Dan, and they said they're going in to change the bottles. They kind of told me what they had done. You could see the bags that were floating.
At that
and
point, when I came up, Steve asked me, "You okay?" Yep, okay, we're good to go.
So now remember, I'm thinking Steve is the strongest diver we have. So I look over my shoulder and I'm trying to get my bearings so I can go right out to the fountain. As I'm swimming backwards, I'm looking at Steve, he gets in the water, and I look over my shoulder again to see where the fountain is. And I look back and Steve's up to here in the water. Give me a second.
He had my recollection, he was playing with a lift bag. He had a lift bag, he was doing something with it.
He had his lift bag, thank you. He had his lift bag attached to his BC. So I looked back at him and he was up to here. I could see his eyes and I swear he was looking at me. My biggest regret, and I know better, is that I didn't do this. I did not do this to him. Now, I can see this I'm picturing it in my mind right now. I did not see any bubbles around him at this point in time. I didn't do this. I assumed, because knowing what a strong diver he was, that he was fine. So that was the last time I ever saw Steve. I turned back around to get my bearings straight to the fountain, and when I went back, he was gone. So I'm looking around. Now you remember, it's choppy. There's a little bit of white caps up on the surface, a little bit of white caps.
And it was raining.
And it was raining, and I'm looking, and I'm like doing the little flipper thing, I'm trying to get as far out of the water as I can, and I can't see his bubbles. Now, I'm looking around, I'm like thinking to myself, where the hell are his bubbles? And I thought that, I thought maybe that I was turned around longer than I thought. So I do a 360, I don't see anything. I see Mike and Dan on the shore, and I yell to them, I go, do you see Steve's bubbles? And they go, no. And I go, he was right there. I go, I don't see his bubbles. Do you see Steve? Do you see his bubbles? And at that point, Dan can tell you for what he did.
So Mike Buckle and I are sitting there just talking about the incident, and I saw Steve getting in the water. Saw him with the lift bag, and when he asked where his bubbles are, I'm thinking first thing in my head, bubbles. Why is he even under? So we get out and we're looking, and we can't see any bubbles. It was kind of you'll see it, but it was kind of a steeper slope at the time. So getting out and climbing up was going to be very difficult. We had Dan Miller, he was looking around. I said, we don't see any bubbles, there's no bubbles. I hear Mike drop the F-bomb. That's when I decided I still had air, Mike had 200 pounds. I said, well, maybe what he's doing is he's just kind of following the line. So I just jumped in real quick, went down, and we were about 20 feet of water. And I went down, and I grabbed the cable, and I just started going as fast as I can on the cable, hand over hand. I got to about this point, the last bag, because the bag went up, sticking out of the water. I stuck my head out. That's when Mike Buckle said, we're calling 911, getting the dive team out, get back here. Okay? So then I decide, well, I'm not just going to surface swim, I'm going to go back down underwater. I kind of had an idea of where he went into the water. So I decided to go on down, and then, hold on, right about there is I resurfaced. And that's when he yelled at me, get out of the water. He knew I was out of water, or out of air, because Mike Buckle told him. I'm like, all right, so my last thought was I could remember Steve always told me, if you have a good last seen point of a diver or a victim, that's where they're at. They're always there. And I know I saw him in that area, so I'm thinking, I'm about out of air. I'm going to go down to the bottom, and I'll do a quick look around, and I'll just surface. So I got to the bottom, and there was probably, I don't know, I'm guessing, 6 or so feet of visibility, because then there was a lot of soot above. And I was able to sit on my knees and look around. I didn't see anything. I saw a big boulder. At that point, I kind of went over the top of the boulder. I figured I could feel my regulator getting low. I'll just kind of look over the boulder and just swim up. As I looked over the boulder, I saw him on his back. Could see it plain as day. Eyes open, regulator floating above him.
So at this point, I'm surface swimming back over to where I last saw him, and that's how, when Dan showed me this picture, I said that's not the right lake because there's a building there, because I was using a door handle is what was right behind Steve, the doors to go in. So I'm swimming, and Mike is on the side yelling to get Dan out of the water. He has no air. Dan normally breathes heavy anyway. I know that because I trained him. 600 pounds wasn't going to last him a long time. So as Dan came up, I said, get to shore. We have to regroup and start thinking about how we're going to search for him. At that time, Dan went back down. Mike was yelling at me to get Dan. What I did is I was pretty close to where Dan was, and I followed his bubbles down. Now, like Dan said, this is a quarry, so there are a lot of big boulders in this area where we were. So as I go down, there was zero visibility. I was just kind of following his bubbles down, and then it was like we got to a certain area, and the visibility was pristine, and I saw Dan struggling with Steve on the boulder. Steve was, regulator out of his mouth was hanging, his one eye was open, one eye was closed, and he was laying like this. I immediately reached down, I grabbed his BCD, I hit my BCD, and I just held it. I didn't check anything down there. My thing was get him up and get him out of the water. I held my BCD until over expansion popped. We shot right up to the surface, spit out my regulator, yelled to Mike Buckle, call 911, call 911. At that time, Dan was trying to do mouth-to-mouth on him. As he got there, Steve actually vomited water when Dan
did that. It's a little chunkier than water.
Yeah. But The problem was now we had to get him out. Everything was on. His weight belt was on. We were, still struggling to get him out, but between the two of us with our BCs, we got him to a point.
Hold on a second. Now, when I saw him, I hit his BCD, and you know how there's no air? You could feel it, you push the button, there was nothing. I hit his dry suit, nothing. He had the lift bag attached to him. I put my regulator under there, and I'm just watching like a little trickle of bubbles. For a long time, I thought that's what lifted him up. Mike was on the other side. Adrenaline is going through the roof, guys. I don't see Mike. Mike's got him. Thankfully, he pulled us both up because I could remember needing air. I put my regulator back in my mouth, and there was no air. It was kind of like our class, the underwater survival training. Had no air and spit it out, and that's when we popped. So really, we probably would have lost him if he didn't come down and grab him too.
So we got him up to the surface, and we were struggling because this is not what the surface looked like. It was rocky. I mean, big boulder rocks. And Steve was not a small
and
guy.
dirt and grass, and it was wet.
Yeah. So we called Desplaines. I yelled to Mike to say we had a diver down, but he's out of the water. So Desplaines would have an underwater team come. They get there. Dan and Mike start tag teaming CPR. I'm cutting Steve's dry suit off, getting his weights off, getting his tank and everything off.
That was right about there. We had to take turns because me and Mike had gear on. Mike Buckle didn't, so we were kind of trying to tag team. We actually said, okay, one guy start cutting your stuff off. So we're cutting stuff off, and then we started cutting Steve's stuff off. Things were floating everywhere.
So it was a mess. Desplaines got there. They worked him on scene. They did everything that they could for him.
Right up there, right around in this
Right
area.
up where that corner of that sidewalk is, actually, is where all this was going on. You can't really see the boulders. They transported Steve to Lutheran, and at that point they pronounced we were still at
The site
when they told us that they had pronounced him. So I can't remember who called. I don't know if it was Bob Gorbett that called me back or whatever. Because while all this was going on, I called our chief to tell him what was happening, and I think that he found out, and then he had to call Mako, because Steve's brother Jeff is a big shot with Mavis. I don't know if he's the president anymore, or he might be.
He's the chief of Cary.
Cary's fire chief. But him and his brother were coming, and they diverted and picked up Diane, who was Steve's wife. And then we were just at the hospital, and that's what happened. That's what happened.
As far as what exactly happened, we're not really sure. There was a huge investigation, obviously. I do know his gear was sitting out. Obviously we left his gear on the shore. I put his regulator in my mouth, no air. I put his octopus in my mouth, no air. Now we were diving really with recreational gear at the time. We didn't have full face masks. We didn't have redundant air. We didn't have any of that. I grabbed the bottle and I turned it towards me. And then I watched the lines charge up. His bottle was turned off. So why was it turned off? We're not really sure. They sent it off to gear to get checked by an independent contractor. They said that they were able to mimic a free flow. So maybe the thought was when he turned it on, it started flowing air and he shut it off. Who knows? Maybe he had it on and he turned it off at the time. Don't know.
From what I understand, the coroner had stated that I thought that it was that he died of a heart attack. He had cardiomyopathy, which is an enlarged heart. When the next day, now if something like this happens, it's a homicide scene investigation. So now, granted, the one thing, obviously, we were all a wreck when we were at the hospital. And I remember walking out to my car, and I was just, my wife wanted to come, and I'm like, no. My sister was there. There was one of the reporters that had come out, and man, I thought I was just going to get hawked by him, and I must have turned around and shot him a look like, leave me the F alone. And he backed off and didn't do anything. That was the only time I've ever respected a reporter. But the next day, going into Des Plaines Police Department and dealing with the cops, they played good cop, bad cop with me. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. This is my friend you're talking about. And this guy, I remember, he said, you guys told me that there was no air in his tank. And I said, no, sir. I said, I didn't tell you that. I said, I never looked at his equipment. I said, beforehand, Steve would never put an empty tank on. We hadn't used our tank, so there's no reason, so it should have been empty. Well, he flips something across the table. He goes, well, explain this. And I look at it and I said, I can't explain that. I said, I don't know what this is. And it was Steve's pressure gauge, and it was 2,800 pounds or something. So just be prepared for that if something like this happens. You know, be prepared for a lot of things that you're probably not generally prepared for. One of the things that I did, and I've got it sitting here, I actually found it, it's probably the first time I've looked at it in 10 or 20 years. I went home that night and I wrote everything that happened from May 9th, which is when I was contacted by Tommy T, up and until Steve's funeral. And I found out what the cause of death was. It's a 5-page document. And I wrote down every single thing that I could remember because I didn't know if we were going to get in trouble for doing this, if workman's comp, all of that stuff. But that was one of the things, you know, they always tell us in paramedic class to document, document, document. I'm telling you, this document that I drew up actually saved Diane Macco from getting screwed by workman's comp to getting workman's comp that she was owed and that she was deserved from Steve's death, because they tried to tell us that we were subcontractors, which we weren't. We were employees, because none of us
Workman's comp not through the village.
No, nothing of this is through the village. This is through the lighting company. But going back to when I think about what had happened, my personal thought on what has happened is that somehow Steve got in the water and he may have been breathing off that bottle and he started to go down. And because we are so overweighted when we do this, like I said, I was on the dive team for years. I used to call it diving by braille, right? Our eyes are closed, we're underwater, we can't see anything in front of us. I think that maybe he was overweighted, and even though he showed us how to get out of this harness, maybe he was unable to do that and it just dragged him down.
He was really tough to lift off the bottom.
He was extremely overweighted. Like I said, I just held on to my BCD and kicked for everything that I had to get us all up to the surface. So that was one of the things that I think happens. They also think that it was a heart attack, which could have been brought on from his swim across the lake.
He had cardiomyopathy, so an enlarged heart, it was stretching of the heart.
Yeah.
So they think that maybe when he swam across, that maybe he was hypoxic to begin with. So that might have kind of contributed to him not releasing the weights, that type of stuff. And then him being sick the day before, who knows? There could have been other issues that we just didn't know about. They sent off his bottle of air, they sent that off to a lab to get the air tested. That was all okay too.
So some of the lessons learned, you know, we did things right. One of the guys I work with always says, what did you do right, before he says, what did you do wrong? We did a few things right. We knew we had a game plan. We followed the game plan. None of us went down, unfortunately, except for Steve. And that's why I don't think he went down to look at that line, because he knew better. He was going to come out and meet me at the fountain. We were going to start at the fountain and work our way back. That's why I personally don't believe that he submerged on his own free will. Now, in Dan's report, Dan Pearson says that Dan Miller of the lighting company said that he saw Steve's fins inverted,
Kicking to go down.
Now, I have personally never had witnessed Steve invert to go down. He always did like the rest of us. He let the air out of his BC, and then down he went. So that part, like I said, that's what he told Dan Pearson. That was in his report, but I wasn't there on shore. I was busy looking for Steve. And I think that what had happened is, because we know when we turn on our tank just to see what our SPG says, and it says that 3,000 pounds or whatever, then you turn it back off. Dan said that he turned his on and he got about 5 breaths out of
When you
Steve's.
turn it on and you close it, you could get about 5 breaths
Okay.
without the mask.
Maybe that's what happened, is that Steve had that. I just caught him at a point where he was exhaling when I didn't see any bubbles. And as he went down, we all know what panic is like. Okay? I've got tangled up 78 feet in black water doing a deep dive. It scares the shit out of you. Okay, maybe something happened where he panicked, and I'm not saying that he did, and he was unable to release his weights. And you guys know, once you start going down, if you have no air, you try to get that BCD to go, you got no air, now you start kicking, and we're so overweighted, it just took him right down to the bottom, and he
And
landed
it
on
was
that rock.
murky,
It was murky up until about 10 or 15 feet.
from the bottom, yeah.
So one of the things that, when we got back from this and when I was put in charge of the dive team, one of my big things is that I said always, 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 I actually made our guys take all of our BCs off, all of our weights out, to make them accountable for, if you're gonna go in the water, you are gonna put this together yourself. You know that it's together properly, you check it, and once you turn that bottle on, leave it on. Don't turn it on and leave it and turn it back off, because those things don't leak. You'll hear it if it leaks. If it's leaking, change out the bottle or get another O-ring. But don't turn your bottle off. Turn it on, check your pressure gauge, you're gonna be fine.
And then we had them put the regulators in their mouth, looking at their pressure gauge and breathing. Just like in that CBA, you'll see that if the bottle's off, that gauge will start moving. If it moves at all, your bottle's not opened up all the way. So that was another thing we implemented.
Yep.
The other stuff is obviously we're getting better equipment. I think for my sanity running the dive team now is the underwater survival training we were doing with displanes. We sent 3 of our guys, including myself, to the class. We're sending a couple more when they come. I'll tell you, Mike sent us all to the pool right after this, get us in the water. You know, it's like Maverick, get them up flying again, but they put us in the water. So I kind of did, I was breathing underwater, and I'm 5 feet of water. And I shut off the bottle, and I'll tell you, the first thing I did was rip it off and jump to the top. I was full panic mode for no reason. I mean, it sounds like it's an easy thing to do, but until you start training, you're not used to it, you know? And our own guys, we still have guys that have a hard time with their mask cleats pulled off. They're in a full-blown panic. So really, I mean, the training, we got to be better in our training and expect that our mask is going to come off. Expect that something's going to happen to our ear.
One of the things that I would hear all the time, and I was involved in a lot of training when I was with Hoffman, is that we're never going to do that in real life. Why are we doing this? We're never going to do it. It's to get familiar with your gear. You know, we're never going to ditch all of our gear and swim to the surface and then turn around and go back down and put it all on underwater, right? But it's to get familiar with it, because you never know when you're going to have to ditch it underwater and then try to untangle yourself and come back up. I always said, you know what, make the drills hard. Don't make them easy. Anybody can do it if it's easy. You know, make them hard, make them difficult. It's not that it's something that you're going to do, but it's that tool that you got in your head. It's that tool that you need in your toolbox, so that if something bad happens, you take that second, and instead of ripping that mask off, everybody in here has AGAs now, right? Instead of ripping off that mask, right? Stop. Think for a second. Okay, what can I do? What can I do? Because the first thing you're going to do is you're going to panic and you're going to freak out. Here's a good diver. First thing his impulse is to get that thing out of his face. Okay? It's hard to do. One of the hardest things we do is put that AGA mask back on. I see guys struggling with it all the time when I used to do our annual training. Guys would struggle with putting that AGA mask back on. Hell, we're doing it in the pool. It doesn't get any easier than that. Okay? What happens if it happens out in Bussy Woods, where you got zero visibility, or at the quarry that we drill at off
Or any of
of
our
53?
ponds.
Anything. Practice, 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 and take your practice seriously. Practice if that comes off, whatever your redundant air supply is. Get used to that, because that's what's going to save your ass.
And reliving this every single day. I know for 16 years it's been in my every single day. So it's obviously worse now, because this past week taking pictures and going to the site the first time, but it's been tough. Toughest thing I've had to deal with. And I was in a war, so.
Yeah.
Any questions about this, about the incident, anything from anyone? Now's a good time. I know we really haven't talked about it. We didn't put it out, and I know there was a lot of people have asked me over the past year or so. Okay. It's about 20 feet.
We found him, my pressure gauge read 18 feet. That was the deepest that I had been. You had one?
Is this an OSHA investigation or?
It was, yeah. Oh, between OSHA and Des Plaines, you gotta remember, OSHA's gonna always get involved when it's a workplace, but also they're working in with the police. So the police are doing the criminal investigation, the interviews and things like that. OSHA's doing more interviews and checking out the equipment, that type of stuff. So obviously, and like Mike said, when I walked out of there, out of the police department, I thought, wow, I feel like I'm gonna get arrested here for something I did wrong. I actually called my uncle, who's a lawyer, and he's like, hey, they're doing their job, that's what they're supposed to be doing. So you're fine, don't worry about it.
Was
So many-
the company fined?
I don't know what the company was fined. I'll be honest with you, after this day, I never had any contact with the company whatsoever. Although I did have to, in my notes, I had certain things that they asked me to do, like send our dive cards and things like that to them. But other than that, I have no idea, nor do I really care, to be honest with you.
Yes, sir.
Two questions. So negligence was never found on the part of the
Right,
company or
right.
anybody. The autopsy, they couldn't determine if it was heart attack or stroke? They couldn't
He-
be conclusive on that, or they?
Now, remember, we were there the next day. So when I was into the police department, the police officer actually had told me that he had a big floppy heart, is what the coroner had said when they did the autopsy. Now, this was just a 24-hour. I don't know how long it comes out till the final ruling is. Like I said, the last that I had heard is that he had had a heart attack.
Yeah,
is
that's
what-
what it sounds like. 'Cause
Yeah.
You're looking at him going down, and he's incapable of dumping his weights when he just does.
That's all conjecture. That's all speculation on my part, of him not being able to do that, because I didn't see that. Like I said, the last I saw was him looking at me. I can picture it in my head with his mask on. He was looking directly at me. And like I said, I didn't do this. And God, I wish I would have done that, because maybe he would still be here if I had done that simple thing that I do to every new diver. And I didn't do it to him.
Anyone else?
Was there a NIOSH report?
I don't think so.
I don't think so, because it wasn't fire department related. In the back?
Is there any reason it couldn't have been floated out with a Zodiac or have guys on the surface doing this? What did you choose to do with just divers, no surface personnel in the water?
It was a pretty big, it was about 4 feet in diameter, 5 feet in diameter.
The
A
fountain,
Zodiac.
getting the fountain out there was easy. That was on
Yeah.
floats. We just had to deflate it. The problem was the line kept getting.
The cables.
The cables, I'm sorry, kept getting hung up because it's a big, we're talking like car-sized boulders down there. And all those crevices and that, the cable would get stuck, and even from the top with the Zodiac, which I think they said they had tried, the cable wouldn't get unstuck, so they needed people in the water. And this was his idea. They had had somebody do it the year before, but I don't know what happened with those guys that did that.
So they would pull it in from the center at winter,
Yes.
and the cable would just be staked amongst the boulders from getting pulled closer to shore?
I think that in the wintertime, they might have had the crew come back out to help with the cable to get it to shore, because in the wintertime, they would pull it up to the shoreline where it was.
Here.
Yeah, the wintertime, from there, they would just pull it back to where the little dot is.
Oops.
I know you got it.
This one, they would just pull it back in. And there was a cable, a little strand of cable that was hooked from here to here, that they actually had it anchored here. And then we had to get a new one across,
So they could pull
and,
it.
and we attached it, and they would pull it that way. So, yeah,
But yeah, remember, this was 2002 also. So we weren't, I don't want to say as advanced as we are now. We certainly weren't, thinking alternate ways. Number one, we were
you gotta
excited.
remember, it's
we were
actually
excited
bigger
to
than
do it.
that picture.
We're like, this is going to be great. We're going to get to use lift bags. All four of us were pretty excited about doing this. Plus, they're going to pay us. So we thought, wow, this will be pretty cool. Obviously, we didn't know what was going to happen, but
We were wrong. Anyone else?
Very
Did
well.
anybody quit the dive team after this incident?
I don't think so.
No, I don't think they did.
And how did your interaction within the department go and with the family?
Well,
You know what? I'll be honest with you. I was scared to death when I went to I almost didn't want to go to the critical incident stress debriefing, because I was the one that got all this all together. So I had a huge amount of guilt on me. I was terrified that I was gonna get out of my truck, and one guy, Rich Wellhausen, who was great friends with him, I thought he was gonna come up and punch me in the face. But he came up and he gave me a hug. I was really afraid about that. That helped. The department was great. Chief Bob Gorvet was awesome. He took care of everything. Mackel's family, I had reservations about going over there. They were phenomenal. They did not blame us in any way, shape, or form. So our
I went there
support
that
that we
night.
got.
I
Yeah,
went
you
there
went that night.
So I'm third generation fireman, dad, grandpa. My family knew Steve and his family really well. So I actually went there that night, talking to them. The whole family was there. Diane had made a comment, well, we don't know what happened. We're not sure. And I thought she knew. I thought the whole family knew I was there. And of course, I was there, Diane. And then the whole room shut up. And then I had to tell the story again. They were good about it. I mean, my hardest time was the CISD, like Mike said, is going there and looking at the guys and like, yeah, and I let them down. So
That was the hardest thing, was looking at the faces of all the guys. And Steve was he was a great guy. I mean, he was a very well-respected, loved guy in the fire department. And I'm walking in the room thinking I'm the asshole that asked him to do this, and now he's dead. And that, I still have guilt about that.
anything else? That's gonna be hard to answer. Thanks, Todd.
Thanks for sharing.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah,
I tell you, they ask you to speak and at an event like this, and you don't really know exactly how things are going to go before you, and that's pretty hard to follow that presentation that was just given. And I'd prepared some of what I was going to talk about, but it'd be interesting to see how my preparation goes along with what we talked about. So first, thank you for all coming to this conference. I like seeing you guys all here. Just a show of hands, how many people have more than 5 years experience on the dive, rescue, and recovery? Okay, so that's great. That's great, because just by that shows me that we have over 500 years of experience right here in this room of doing this stuff. So when we're out in the hallways, we can share that experience with each other. And experience is a funny thing. I could have 20 years of experience in doing diving, and you could have 20 years of experience, but our experiences are different, right? We need to share that knowledge with each other. I like working with the dive community, all right? I find the dive community is a little bit different than everybody else. I think you guys are all special working in the dive community because divers are a little bit different. Some of you guys may have heard my spiel on this before, but in the dive world, we kind of have a lot of elements of all the other teams put together, right? We have, in the dive world, we have TRS type stuff. Yeah, we're playing with ropes. We find ourselves in confined space, trench type environments, right? We have high angle, low angle, most water's down in some kind of depression. So we're using those skills. Do we have hazardous materials? Well, yep, all the water that we're diving in is contaminated, all right? We need to decon. So we have an element of the hazardous materials in what we do. Investigations, there's fire investigation teams out there. I just recently worked on an investigation for a body that we had in the ice, and working with the cops on investigation with that. And we also have our witness interviews that we do, which is kind of a little bit of an investigation itself. EMS, we got that in our area too with that rapid field neuro, and acronyms, right? We got our own share of acronyms like safe diver, safely extend from every dive, right? I feel like I got cheated though on this acronym thing. Did you guys realize that Boyle's Law, you guys know Boyle's Law is, right? We're all divers, know what Boyle's Law, the air goes up, it's going to expand. Did you know Boyle's is an acronym? Did you guys, am I the only guy that got cheated on this, or you guys got cheated on it as well? Yeah, it means breathe or your lungs explode stupid. So I didn't know that. They didn't teach me that. They didn't teach me that was there. So I felt cheated. I found that last night, I'm not the brightest guy out there, but those things there are not the reason. Those things there are not the reason why I think divers are special, though. I think divers are special, an interesting group of people, because we look out for each other in a very, very, don't take this wrong, kind of intimate way, because we are listening to the guy breathing underwater. We're communicating with him underwater. Divers will wake up, and we did this just not too long ago. Wake up, it's 5 degrees outside. It's the worst snowstorm that we've had this year. We drove 70 miles to a dive, a dive training, all right? We go in there and cut a 10 foot by 10 foot by 10 foot hole, and we jump in the lake, right? Most people don't do that, right? In the dive community, we do that. And why do we do it? We do it because we need the knowledge, the skills, and the ability to do those skills, to do that when the call comes in. And we do it because we can't do it alone. So there's a brotherhood in diving. We don't do this alone. You're listening to each other on the mic. We're communicating. We're looking out for each other. And a lot of what we're doing when we're looking out for each other is we're breaking that accident chain that we should all realize is there, that accident chain that the speakers before me were talking about. You know, how can you break that accident chain from that accident happening? So they asked me to talk about some SOG reviews and stuff out here today. So, and they wanted me to speak for an hour. So what I thought the easiest thing to do would just be, it's 43 pages. I'm just going to read it to you real quick. Well, that would be absurd, right? That would be absurd. But my guys wouldn't put that past me, you know? But it would equally be absurd for you to think that you have the information in this document without reading it before you're leading your teams, right? It'd be equally absurd to do that. And there's a lot of good information in here. And this is the game plan, right, before you're doing the dive. So luckily I read it for you. And with that, how many new guys, Swiftwater guys we got going out there? All right, great. Guess what? We got a document for you too now. This will be posted too on the website as well for the Swiftwater, and you'll want to read this one too as well. Now let me tell you something about these documents. When you read them, these are put together pretty well. I think everybody that's put the work into them. First time you go to read that 43-page document, it'll probably take you about 43 minutes. The next time it'll probably take you about 30 minutes, and then the next time it'll take you about 15 minutes. You know, and you can review it from time to time. But things I'm going to talk to you about today. I'm going to review, before I get into this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to review 3 calls that we had in Arlington Heights in the last year, and then I'm going to review some SOG stuff, and then I'm just going to kind of talk to you a little bit about some close calls that are out there, a little bit of a takeaway. So this is the Lake Arlington Rescue, 8/31/2017. Anybody heard of this call? A couple guys. This is a really interesting one. So I am going over, driving the dive van in the morning, going to Wheeling for equipment compatibility drill. So we're going over to see if our equipment works with their equipment. We're driving over there. As I'm pulling into their pool, call comes in for a lady in Lake Arlington. Right, so I'm rounding around, and Brian's in there, and I just flip the lights on and go right back out of the parking lot, and I go en route to this, and I'm one of the first guys on scene, and I met with the husband and a police officer. And the husband tells me the lady has some mental illness issues, and the police officer tells me I got a dog staring into the water, I got a pair of flip-flops floating in the water, and I got a warm coffee cup right there. She usually walks around here. Now that is not exactly all the information that I wanted, right? I mean, it's kind of, I would have liked to have a little more information going into this. Now there's a trail that runs all the way around here. For you that are not familiar with Lake Arlington, there's a 1.9 mile trail that runs around that's frequently used by everybody. And it's a 50-acre lake at its normal height. It's a man-made lake. It does expand, gets much larger than that. It could go up, you know, a good 6 feet in flood events. But this was at normal level, and this is where our last scene point, we're going to call our last scene point right there. So we roll up, divers are rolling in, drown level 2 response means that in our area that we're getting all our on-duty divers, all right? We'll talk a little more about the drown level 2 at the end. So first guys come up and I say, we want to search this area here. That's what we're going to consider last scene point, that's what we're going to search. And then I had non-divers coming up to me and saying, what do you need? Chief, what do you need? And I said, these boats here, I need them out of the way. So get them boats out of the way. Well, the boats were tethered together with a black quarter-inch cable that was rubber coated, all right? And to connect all the boats together with one cable. So they pulled all the boats right up, not on the sand, just shy of the sand there, okay? So resources start coming in. I got divers going in this area here. I got divers going, I had extra people. So what am I gonna do? I'm gonna search more area, right? So I got divers going here, displanes come in, they have their ROV that's got a sonar in it. They set up here, working here. The reason I have them set up here is because I had Elk Grove come in and set up their sonar here. So I had pretty good sonar capability, I had divers. There was a pontoon boat on a buoy, anchored on a buoy right out here. We had a guy in a Mustang suit go over there, search that boat just to make sure nothing was going on over there. And there we had it. We kind of had all our resources played out, and they're saying, well, what's next? I said, well, we got everything deployed the way we're supposed to have things deployed, and we're gonna roll this for 90 minutes. So, boats were moved here, primary there, all right? Now, this is another kind of view, that's without the ramp here. Really searching this area in here. Now, as we're going into this, we're starting to realize that if we don't find her, we got the other 50 acres to look at. So during that 90-minute period, we decided, you know what, let's get the side scan guys to come in with their boat and get set up so if they have to start running this lake. So now we're out 90 minutes, and the plan is at 90 minutes, we're gonna call all our team leaders in, pull all our divers up, we're gonna change over to recovery, right? We're gonna let one of our ambulances go, probably let some divers go, and things like that. So now we're doing that, and about that time, that we're reconvening and moving over to a recovery, sonar says over here somewhere that they got a really solid hit. They want to take a look at it. So they fly that ROV over there, they get some divers over there. They're over here starting to focus. What happens when something with firemen, you know, you get some activity over there, everybody just starts migrating over there. So it kind of starts getting real quiet over here. And then a couple of guys back there that were taking a break up in here start screaming like little girls. And at that time, at almost 2 hours into the incident, the victim comes up like a swamp monster and climbs out of the lake. I'm not lying to you. This is what happened. Come right up, the boats were here. This is a floating dock and there is no air underneath. There's big air blocks, but there's no air underneath there to breathe. There's about 3 inches of air underneath the ramp there. This lady was hiding from us for 2 hours under the water. And the only place, the top of her hair was dry, all right? The top of her hair was dry. The only place she could be was in that tunnel of the boats that we had pulled over here. It's the only logical place. And when she was in the ambulance and they were talking to her, she said, I felt like I was getting pulled along. Well, who pulled her along? We did. We pulled her along when we pulled the boats all back, right? She come with the boats up to that area. She was slightly hypothermic. The ambulance, I had that ambulance crew, they were at the ready, a great crew. They got her up onto a stretcher and hauled away immediately. That time my brain was mashed potatoes. I could not believe what happened. I'd never seen that before. So what's my takeaway on this? My takeaway on this, guys, is hopefully, you know, you could take something away. You asked something to be moved out of the way, they moved it out of the way. But maybe those should have been pulled all the way up out of the way. Maybe they should have beached. Maybe we should have pulled them, you know, to another area. Maybe she would have traveled with them there and made it worse. But this is my takeaway. This goes from 0 depth all the way to 6 to 8 feet over here. This area, if you can't see the bottom, has to be searched as well. It all has to be searched. You're not going to search that with a diver. I can ask Todd and he could tell me how well a sonar is going to reach up into that very shallow water, right? But that area has to be searched also. Does it have to be searched with a diver? No, it doesn't. Get some of those other personnel out there, right? I mean, kids wade in this water all the time. Get some other personnel up there, if it's a Mustang suit or whatever. This area has to be searched also, you know? So that's my takeaway on that. Very interesting call that we had there. I won't forget that one anytime soon. All right.
Hey, Chief,
Yes.
I was on the Tenderloin with Palatine that searched that area. We went underneath the boats. We went all the way back to the dock. She had to be underneath the walk section from the ground to the dock.
And
She had to bend because.
And I've debated that with,
All that.
yeah, I debated that also with myself, trying to figure out exactly where she was at. I went and looked under the dock, you know, as well. You're right. She could have been, it's potentially she could have been right up under here. When she says she felt like she was getting pulled along, I have a feeling she was up in here. Oh, and then the one thing I didn't tell you about this. Later, after we pulled her out, one of the cops came and told us some history on her that she had hidden in Chicago under a kayak, you know. So that would have been really nice to know earlier. I don't know what point they obtained that information, but that would have been really interesting to know. This call here, I'll tell you one on this call here, the divers that all came, talk about, I was telling you about how great you guys are. Everybody kept coming up to me, what do you need, what do you need? And not only what do you need, hey, you might want to think about this. And it was very, very helpful. All right, another call that we had. This is Salt Creek, July 21st. Right here is a car in the water. This car went in the water on a Friday night. We had some really, really bad rains. The guy took this car in over 200 feet upstream here. The car got pushed all the way down past the fence bridge here and rested in this area here. Now this picture was taken on Saturday. And the reason it was taken on Saturday is because the crew, and we've done this many times in Arlington Heights, have made the decision not to dive on a car because we had credible information that, you know what, we don't need to dive on it right now. We had a guy go in at 10:30 at night one time. We decided to dive on it the next morning. We've done that several times. And this was another time we did it. The only difference is I wish the crew would have put these yellow caution tapes there. When they left the scene that Friday night, I wish they would have put those up. And the reason why is because we got an additional call on Saturday for a car in the water. All right, so we knew that we got the additional call. Not that big of a deal, but what if someone with a little loopy thought there was an imminent rescue to be made, right? Because they seen the car in the water. Maybe we'd have a bystander going there like that guy out in DC. So we got the additional call. We came out, we assessed it again. We put the yellow tape up there, and we decided that we talked to all the stakeholders and said, we'll reevaluate it on Sunday. So now I was on there Friday, went to Sunday, and then now Saturday, and then now on to Sunday. Sunday we went back out there, and we had this much water. We had this much of the car showing up, about 8 inches, all right? Well, I went out there to assess it like I promised the property owner and everything that I was gonna go out there and check it out. And as I pull up, the wrecker company comes up, and they got a little crappy residential ladder and a tow truck, and they're gonna have a guy go out there and do it. Now, the wrecker company does an outstanding job of pulling cars, but I don't necessarily think they're gonna do an outstanding job dealing with swift water environment. Still have a lot of water going by this that leads right into a culvert about 30 feet down. Not necessarily something I want the wrecker guys to do, and I was pretty much convinced that they were gonna do it one way or another, with me being there or not. So, the way we did this one, and there's nothing drastic, but what we did was we took this extension ladder off the truck and we went ahead and roped the top of it. We had a couple guys heeling it, and we lowered it down like a lever all the way down onto that car. Now, yes, as the angle increases, yes, the ladder does flop a little bit at the end. There's just not a whole lot you can do about that. But we got the ladder on there, had it roped, and we got a swift water guy go out there, vest, tethered to a breakaway, helmet, gloves. You know, very hot that day, so putting him in the suit would have probably been a little more hazardous than not having him in the suit. But what he's able to do is he was able to take the sling and he put it through, you see there's a sunroof there? He was able to move it through the sunroof around and then hitch it up, and the car came out nice and balanced. We didn't flip it over. It happened to be. I'm not saying that's the best way to do it. I'm saying that way worked for us on that call. All right. All right, this is one we had just a couple weeks ago. This is an interesting call. I was down at Romeoville visiting one of my recruits down at the academy, and I get a call from the shift commander. We got a body in the water. This is a non-emergent thing, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to recover it once they're done with the investigation. He's been in there a while. Said, no problem, I'm on my way. Drove up in time to get a view of where this is. So this is off Gulf Road. The body is here. He was in clothing. He didn't have the tarp on him at the time. He was in in clothing. The employees thought it was some debris in there. It's been in there for a long time. You know, we just thought it was some debris is what the employees of the building said. And so the guys came up with a nice plan. They threw a couple of guys in. The ice wasn't that thick because that was right after a melt. They came in and they kind of chiseled out the ice that was around him because it was thin enough to do so. And their plan was to a couple Mustang suits, a Stokes basket, and a rope, and they were going to go in there, get them in the basket, and then slide them out. Well, one of the benefits, and if you're in a leadership position on your team, is one of the benefits of standing back is you get to see what they're going to do, and maybe you have another way of doing it. You can offer that up, and that's what I did because I saw this little retaining wall here. I said, that's a nice retaining wall there. It's pretty stout, but it's also a nice fulcrum. It's a good fulcrum that we could use. So what we did is I just kind of politely went over and said, hey, I got an idea. Because I did something like this once before. I said, what if we were to take a Stokes basket, put it on a roof ladder. Now this is on a 14-foot roof ladder. I couldn't bring the actual pictures because I wanted to, keep the privacy of this, of the individual out of it. I didn't want to use actual pictures, so I recreated this one for you. This is a 14-foot ladder. We have a 20-foot roof ladder on our truck. So you can imagine how much leverage you get on a 20-foot roof ladder. But you see how we deployed the hooks on the roof ladder? Boy, did that nestle into that Stokes basket nice. Then we took webbing and webbed that thing right onto there, all the way down. So we had it attached on there real well. The guys were able at that point to slide that thing in and scoop him up like a ladle. They just used that as a fulcrum, pushed down on there, popped the guy up. There was one guy with a 12-foot hook kind of held onto the clothing a little bit, and then we were able to pull him right up out of there. The whole thing, it looked really nice, went well. The other benefit that we had, yes?
So nobody was in the water?
Nobody was in the water, exactly. So that's right, the water's a hazard, right? Okay, a couple benefits here. Nobody had to touch the body, right? Nobody ever touched the body. Nobody had to get in the water, right? We were able to work from a good point of advantage. But the best part is that the ME wanted the body on a tarp. So the whole ladder and assembly came right up out, right? It was right next there. They took their pictures and whatnot, and we just rotated the whole assembly, and he flopped right onto the tarp, and all we had to do was wash up a ladder and a Stokes basket and throw out some webbing. That's kind of how those went, and I just wanted to share those with you because those are little successes that we had, and put it in your toolbox, share some knowledge, right? Okay, now I'm going to read that 43 pages to you. There's going to be a quiz. You want to take the quiz now or you want to take it at the end? Now? we can go to that. All right, the operating guideline statement, it can be found here on mavisdivision1.org. All right, the newer one, we did some adjustments to it. That can be found there. We're going to get that up on there as well. The Swiftwater one's not there. It'll be there shortly. Okay, breaks it into 3 areas of operations. Talking about annual stuff. What do we got to do annually, guys? Swim test? Skills? All right, ice dive for us ice divers. How many dives do you need?
2.
You need 2 team dives. 6, and what do they got to be? One's got to be a skill review, right? And 5 of them got to be open water dives. Okay. What type of status do you have? You're basically one of 2 things. You're active, which means you're attending all the trainings, right? You're keeping yourself up to speed. But if you can't, we all got personal lives, guys. If you can't, what do you got to do? Write a letter to the team leader. Take a 12-month leave of absence, and we'll get you back up to speed from there. All right. Some things prior to dive: safety and team management. All right. Risk-benefit analysis. We heard the previous speaker talking about how they came up with a plan and with their dive, a risk-benefit analysis just before you do the plan. Is this worth doing what we're going to do? On the Lake Arlington call, we started off with a primary and a safety. That's what we started off at, and we're able to do that to our document, but it was a risk-benefit analysis. I'm very familiar with that lake. We train there all the time. I know that I was able to do what I had to do with the people that I had. Quick risk-benefit analysis. All right. Do you have the safety? We just talked about that. You need the safety. You need the primary diver in the rescue mode. You can go with 2 as long as the 90's en route. All right. Develop that emergency action plan. All right. A little more safety team management. All right. Do you have decon available? Talking about decon, a change. I'm going to try to introduce these changes to you. Decon 1 is not coming to you on your drown level 2s anymore automatically. All right. We changed that, all right? We changed that. Couple reasons. One, I haven't seen it used. It's a late resource, scene resource that you're using. You don't need it right up in front, rolling out. It delays Arlington's dispatch. If you want it early, just call for it. It's coming. All right, but it's going to help with Arlington's push out, and it's not something that we're actively using. And there's also technology that we've increased. The McCaw system, we had it up here last year, all right? It does decon very quick, very effective, all right? So that's not rolling out. Also, another change that's going on is the Mabus Division 1 boat pack is not rolling out on the Drown Level 2 right now, all right? It is an additional resource that you can call if you want it, but it's not rolling out with the Palatine Dive Squad. They are rolling out with a boat, but it's not the boat pack. All right, Arlington's gonna be rolling with a boat, Palatine's rolling with a boat, Wheeling's still rolling with a boat, Elk Grove's coming out with some boats. So you should have the boats and equipment that you need, but because some logistical areas on Palatine's concerned in that's not gonna be rolling out right away. All right, and then so I covered decon there. So on our decon and most of y'all's vehicles, you should have, on our squad and on most of you guys, you should have decon equipment. Some decon equipment there, we have it, all right. Usually the dive tables, only if we're getting really deep, need to be referred to early on. No dives in 100 feet. Change in the document. Remember that stuff they used to talk about, a 60-foot, 100-foot, no greater than 100-foot, divers could do this, they can't do that. That's been changed now. So you need to be trained to be able to dive to 100 feet. Our maximum capability is still 100 feet, but that mumbo jumbo about 60 and 100 is now gone out of the document. All right, 3-minute safety stops, and then post-field neuro. Everybody knows that this now should be all in your vans. That's a real easy way to document that neuro afterwards. Hit it on the tablets we have, hit it on your phones, and you can get to that neuro. I'm sorry I'm putting you to sleep. There's not too many of these. This is the rough part, you know. All right, dive action plan. You know, we all heard it. You don't plan to fail, you fail to plan. ALS transportation, there's a change in the document here. On a rescue mode, how many ambulances do you need? Two. In a recovery mode, how many you need? One, okay? On our Lake Arlington one, that victim that came out, she was in the ambulance within a minute or two. Why? Because that one ambulance we still had was still at the ready. And that's outstanding, because if it wasn't her and it was one of us, they would have been at the ready. So even though you're going down, they still need to be at the ready. What about trainings now? Do you got to have the ALS transportation at the training? Yes. No, they changed it. You have to have the equipment now. Is the way it's worded, you have to have the equipment. So we tried to do that because ambulances were a little hard to get, you know, so we can bring our squad out there, reserve squad or whatnot, and bring the ALS equipment out. Now we do notify the area, the closest ambulance available to where we're training at. All right, all divers will be tethered, all right. Tender should be at that operational level, and the flag, you have to use that if we're doing the boats, if you can use it. All right. Termination of dive. The ultimate safety of a dive resides with whom? Yourself, right? I can't tell you if you're not feeling well. I can't tell you that your equipment's not working properly. I could do the checks and stuff. But the ultimate responsibility resides in you as the diver. If somebody's asking you to do something unsafe, don't do it. Terminate the dive, all right? There's many, many checks and balances that go in as we do our dives, right? There's a lot of safety sheets, pre-dive checklists, things like that all have to happen. But ultimately, the safety resides in you. Other areas you do dive termination. The dive tender says, hey, this guy's breathing like crazy, all right? Or has some kind of emergency, can do it. Cylinder pressure of 1,000, loss of electronic communications. All right, in the opinion of a competent person, and does that competent person have to be a diver? Can it be your BC? Right? He sits there and says, no, we're just not doing this. We got lightning or whatnot, we're just not doing it. All right, the depth, 100 feet, remember we talked about, and the no decompression limit being reached. That's the limit at which you have to decompress before you can't go straight from the bottom up to the surface without stopping and decompressing. All right. Some factors to consider for the risk benefit, all right? We talked about exceeds the benefit of the dive operation, the team's capabilities, what mode are we in? Do we have a credible last seen point? If we don't have a credible last seen point, what are we searching for? Where are we going to search? I mean, how much can we actually search? We talked about that. And then what's swift water? All right. Okay. Dive action. Are we training or are we operation? Because there's a couple things in there that make a difference between training and operations. Are we rescue or recovery? What's the time frame there? All right. Are we shore-based, boat-based, boat-assisted? Do we have the minimum of 3 divers? What type of patterns are we going to do? That's important to tell the diver before he goes in. That's part of the plan. All right. Incident control zones. You're hot, warm, and cold. All right. And what's your objective? All right. That's part of what your plan is. Scene evaluation, coming in from the safest point possible, which may not be exactly where you're diving. There may be a safer place to enter the water. All right. Searching the last scene point and upon initial entry. And then if they're not there, what do? All right. We go back approximately 1/3 the distance from the last scene point and start our pattern there. All right. Hit the last scene point, then come back, and then continue your pattern from there. All right. Vehicle in the water. Divers shouldn't penetrate the vehicle other than like a hand sweep. All right. You're going to do that quick 360. Well, it's easy written on the form. What do you think is going to happen to your tethered line as you're trying to do a 360 degree around the It's not like you're stepping off the fire engine, you're just going to walk around, right? You got tethers on you. So you got some line management issues there. Maybe you got to do 180 and 180, you know, so you're not getting jammed up too bad. All right, in recovery, we're not going to keep the doors and windows closed. I'm going to search that debris field. Emergency procedures, you're going to enact them if you have a communication failure. All right, if you're deploying your safety diver, if your diver comes off tether or loss of communication, diver's in distress, all right, that's when you're going to implement those. Lost diver emergency procedures for ice. For ice, you got to have that, you got to be tethered, it's got to be a locking carabiner. We're not interested in having snap shackles there. We don't want to lose you under the ice, all right? Even if you could swim forever, we're limiting you to 20 minutes. Same again with that 1,000 PSI, all right, 20 minutes. Now, not exceed a radius of 50 feet. There's an equation that we use for that, and it basically comes out that I think the most you're going to go out is about 89 feet of rope, but you're maintaining 50 feet in around the circle there, putting you to sleep. I'm almost done. Lost diver procedures, okay? So what happens if you're lost? You're an ice diver and you're lost. What do you have to do? Okay, but before you go to the surface, you're going to hang out for a minute. You'll look around, see if you can figure out your situation, right? Can't figure out your situation, you're not going to the surface really, because the surface is on top of the ice, right? You're going to go up under the ice, that comfortable feeling you have when you feel the lid. All right, and what are you going to do there? What's that? Okay, so you're going to stay there, okay, and you're going to breathe, all right? And now they're going to deploy the safety guy. How's the safety guy going to deploy? 30 degrees left, 30 feet beyond, and he's going to go there. So now you're the lost diver, and the rope comes to you. What do you got to do? Which way are you going to pull? Yeah, three. You're going to go 3 and 3. You're going to notify, hey, here I'm on the line. Say the line never comes to you, and you keep breathing down, and you're starting to get nervous, and your pressure gets down to 500 PSI. What are you going to do? What's that?
Breathe shallower.
Well, yeah, but there's something that we're expecting you to do. At 500 PSI, we're expecting you to dump your weights and fully inflate your BCD. What are we getting prepared for? Okay, we're getting prepared. We're getting prepared that, you know what, we're going to be doing some searching for you for a while, and be a whole lot easier to find you plastered up underneath the ice than it is to find you on the bottom. All right, so those are responsibilities that you have as a diver. You're going to be resting up underneath that ice, and then we're going to come in there and find you. All right. Okay, so here's your quiz. What's 1 knot? Swift water. What's 100 feet or greater? Limitations of the team, right? As much as we're going to go. What's 19 cubic feet? Okay, the capacity that your pony body has to be. 90 minutes. All right, 90%. Okay, ready diver, good. 20 foot from the water's edge.
Life jacket.
Okay, and that's also, we're going to control the zone, right? So we're going from hot to warm, 20 foot, all right? Now that always depends. I always tell people that depends. Because if you're on a cliff versus a long gradual grade, what I say is if you could fall over twice and still not get into the water, then you're kind of in the warm zone, all right? 1,000 PSI? What's that? All right. One third the distance. Okay, we search the last scene point, we come back 1/3 the distance, all right? What's S square root D squared plus L squared? Math, yeah, that's the math you have to do to figure out how far the 50 feet of rope actually is, 50 feet of radius is actually from the hole, all right? 360 degree, where are we doing that? Okay, 1 minute EAP. I just mentioned, what are you gonna do for 1 minute? That's the ice diver, right? He's in there, he's gonna hang out for 1 minute on the bottom, look around, see if he can fix his problem, then he's gotta get up. 10 foot closer, does anybody know what that is? All right, 10 foot closer is when you lost the ice diver and he strings out, if he's out at 25 feet, and you go out, you don't have him, you're gonna go 10 feet closer, so you're gonna go 15 feet and you're gonna start searching for him if the lost diver protocol doesn't work. 3/8 diameter is the diameter of our shackles in that. 20 minutes at 1,000 PSI? Max for an ice. 50 feet, I beat that into the ground. 30 degrees left, 30 degrees out, 30 feet out, I beat that up. 500 PSI, what are you gonna do? Drop your weights, inflate your BCD. 3 tugs? Both ways, thank you. 10 foot sides, what has 10 foot sides? Triangle, all right. And you know what, the triangle, guys, if you're ever doing the trainings, you know the flat side of your triangle, if you're going out that way to search that area there, put the flat side that way. But invert your triangle, if you're doing surface ice rescue type work at your departments, put the flat side towards the shore when they're pulling people up in the Mustang suits. It'll make it a whole lot more comfortable on the guys. Just invert the direction of that. 20, 50, and 100 foot intervals. Ice diving. We're putting them down. The circles, right? The circles and arrows. All right, that's what we're putting those at. 36 inches. Minimum length for your octopus line. All right. 35 pounds. Lift. Minimum capability. So you guys that are out there that are weighing real heavy, okay, remember that your BCD does not have an unlimited lift capacity. All right. Read the specs on your BCD. You have to lift you and the weight you put on there and the rest of your equipment. You can exceed the lift capacity of your BCD. That's a dangerous thing because now you're going to shed your weight. You know, you shed your weight. If you start having weight on your ankles and weight on the bottle, neck, and things like that, you know, you're not going to have as much lift as you want. 80 cubic feet, what's that? All right, and a surface, guys, we're at 72 on my bottles, and there's kind of an allowance for that because we're on supplied air. All right. Now, we talked about that before with the previous diver and his bottle being off. In Arlington, we also too had a fatality of a diver working on the side. And I like to bring Don's picture up here, not just because he wasn't, trust me, he wasn't my best friend. I'm not going to get up here and tell you that he was. But what I am going to tell you is he left, his death represented something to me that for the last 10 years, okay, I've been able to recall, you know, that how dangerous diving actually is. All right, Don ran out of air. He ran out of air, okay, diving. So how can we prevent that? How can we prevent running out of air? Well, in the SCBA world, what do? We get out. When do we get out? We're supposed to be out before then, right? Okay. Well, let me give you a little thought about that. That 1,000 PSI I talked about, what is that? Safety. It's emergency air, right? It's emergency air. Okay? That means that everything else has failed along the way. And this recently happened with me on a training dive where some of the factors in the accident chain were all going along. Here we go. We're leading up to an accident here. Things were missed. They get missed. All right? But there's things in that chain to break the chain, like air checks, all right? Doing 5-minute air checks. That can identify you have air problems, all right? Monitoring your equipment, right? Monitoring your breathing rate. Those things. But who's the ultimate responsibility reside in? You. And that 1,000 PSI of air, whose is that? Is that your air? No. No, it's not your air. It's my air as the safety. That's my air. It's his air as incident command. It's his air. It's your wife's air. It's your daughter's air. It's your son's air. And it's not to be used by you unless you let us know. And if you're going to engage your reserve air on us interspiral guys and start breathing on that, or if you're on recreational type diving equipment and you're going to breathe that last 1,000 pounds, you better be jerking that rope something fierce. You better be getting to the surface. You better be communicating in the mask that you are on emergency air. This is our last effort to get you out. If you breathe that, you've cheated us all. You understand? So that's what that air exists for. That's how we keep somebody from, like Donnie, from running out of air. That's how we keep these accidents from happening. We break the chain, and that last 1,000 pounds, guys, is the last link in the chain. We have to break the chain. And this diving, we filled the room here, guys. And I'm so happy we filled the room. But because we filled the room, that means there's more people doing this type of work. The more we do this work, the more exposed to this type of thing, to type of accidents we're going to have. We're going to have more exposure to it, right? With that exposure, we need to put more and more safeties in there. Monitor what we're doing. You know, we're all going to make mistakes. I've made many of them, and I apologize for the ones I've made. But I made many of them. But it's that safety, that constant going back. What's at 5 minutes? What's at 10 minutes? Do things not make sense? Does someone says, hey, we have a 5-minute air check. The guy comes back and says he has 1,000. What does that tell you? You got a problem. You got a problem. 1,000. Boom. Right there. 1,000 PSI. Get them up, right? So those are kind of some of the things that I wanted to talk to you today. Was there any questions from the group?
Your SOGs address the minimums of 1,000 PSI. How do you address the surface supplied air system?
So the surface supply air system, the situation is with this, guys, that are not on surface supply, all right? I have the system up here. Please take a look at it, and one of my guys can explain the things to you. Here's where we're at. The surface supply, ours operates on a 4,500 PSI bottle. It's a high pressure line, feeds it down to the system. So there's a gauge up there. That gauge, at about 1,000, there's a red mark there, all right? And it'll start whistling, alarming to you that the pressure in that system is low. And you can actively, live, change the bottles and always keep that pressure over that. The problem is with surface supply is that the diver can use some air, inflating and deflating his BCD and things like that in his dry suit. He has a gauge. All right, his gauge should read about 4,000 PSI. It should really read 4,000 PSI for almost the entire duration of the dive because that gauge is reading bottle pressure. So every 5 minutes you say, what's your air pressure? It should be coming back 4,000. If it doesn't come back 4,000, what's that representing? He's breathing off his tank, all right? So do you now have a redundant air source anymore? No, you don't have a redundant air source. So we want you on a redundant system. So its surface supply is not perfect. It just isn't. So how do you manage that on the interspiral type surface supply equipment? Constant air checks. That air check should always be coming back at 4,000. A great thing to do would be that air check should also happen. Call for that air check. The guy on the cart, the guy with the surface supply should also be reporting what the air is. At that time. And that's kind of how we bridge that. There may be a better way to do it, and if, please bring it up if you know one.
No, I just didn't know if you had anything in your SOGs saying limits and stuff in regards to surface air, because, like, if you looked up 3 lines, obviously your air bottle is going to drop dramatically because you're filling 3 lines.
So we always have we have 2 in the system, one's operating on, one's a reserve, and we always have an extra one sitting there. That we're running with it. a lot of air goes in those lines. It blows the first bottle. If you have 3 lines, it's going to blow the entire first bottle, even if you got an hour bottle. And then you're going to need to switch one over. So now you could just dump it. We are on 2 lines right now, and it still consumes the majority of a bottle. But dealing with the surface supply, you got to have more supplied air. When we hook up with Elk Grove, they got a cascade that they could tie into us. Any other, on an actual scene, anybody coming with SCBAs, we can hook into it. So we could do an air cache. We could have 10 bottles lined up. Now typically a lot of those are going to be the 30-minute bottles, not the hour bottles or the 45-minute bottles. They're going to be those, but it doesn't matter to us because so much air is already stored in the lines that we could switch to those little bottles and they still last a little while.
So is your limits more time frame rather than air pressure?
Absolutely, absolutely. You gotta pull the guys out. It does not limit it for open water dives, the duration of time, because it just addressed the 1,000 pounds. Maybe it's a little bit of an antiquated part of it, needs to be updated.
Or the no decompression limits, that would be the other item.
That would be true. That would be true. But I mean, if we're at 30 feet, I wonder what that time frame would be. Yeah, it would be quite a distance. But yes, thanks, Doug. Another question. I mean, get us talking a little bit if you want, guys. We have some time here.
So what would be your time frames?
On a dive?
Yeah, for service supply.
Service supply, I would say most guys, you wouldn't want more than 20 or 30 minutes. Unless something, there's some other factors there. It's strenuous, diving strenuous, you know? Especially when you're pulling through weeds and stuff like that, it may be less. You know, the nice thing about the wired communication though, you could talk to the guy. Now I've pulled a guy out after 5 minutes before, you know, I've had him ask me to pull him out, you know, because he's spent, you know, and you could hear that as the tender, you know, you could hear how hard that guy's working, keep talking to him, you know. It starts to become a little evident at times when the time to pull him out is.
The exception to the rule is when we're doing sector scan searches, diver directed via sector scan, the diver's just sitting out, hanging out down there. We'll keep somebody in for an hour. As long as they're of sound mind judgment and they're warm, they're comfortable, they're listening, they're doing what we tell them, we'll keep them down for an hour max.
Do you have that outlined in your SOG sent out?
That we do not.
We do not. And there's always needs to be adjustments to them, you know, and these are good points. These are good points. How many guys have done a sonar directed dive? Oh, there's a good group of you. Some of you guys that haven't, if you haven't done it, it's really something really interesting. You get down in the water and you hold that line and you're just standing there and then they tell you, take 5 steps right, 2 steps back, take another one right. Yeah, it should be down at your right foot. It's really something. It does conserve a lot of air, a lot of energy. But, you know, you have to wait for it to get there and get set up. But once you get it set up, we run the traditional patterns and stuff. Then once sonar gets set up, then we start looking at how we're going to utilize, incorporate sonar in there and look for the targets they have. But it does not replace looking at the last scene point.
Can you go into some of your discussion in regards to the reasons for removing the ambulance during the training?
Removing the ambulance during the training, the biggest part of not having that there is the availability, of trying to get them out there. It's not as easy just to grab an ambulance from these communities that we have. I'm not saying it's not there all the time. I'm just saying we can conduct it with the ALS equipment. We notify, sometimes when we get to areas out west, you know, we'll notify Cary Algonquin, you know, or Algonquin, say, hey, you know what, we're going to be diving in this area. See if they could stand by for us. But there has been an adjustment in that.
I'd say more often than not, we have them there.
Yes.
I mean, way more often than not, there is one thing. But the biggest part on that, if I can just jump in, was the discussion that came up when we were talking about if we're training out of town. And if we're in a different system, everything else, it kind of got into some logistics of actually how do we control the medics that are working on patient. If we're in another system, we're with hospitals we don't normally work with, we might have different drugs. So as long as we figured we had ALS capabilities on scene with an AED, AED airway equipment, the basic cardiac drugs, we at least get started on everything in time to get an ambulance there to be able to transport us.
And some, I mean, it can come down to sometimes, you know, your policy's saying you're doing it one way, and you're doing it another, and that's not good either, So I would, in order for that SOG to sit there and say that ambulance is going to be there on every training, then it's going to be there on every training. And if it's not there, we're not training, right? So now the guys take the liberty of maybe still doing the training. Does that ever happen? I feel a little more comfortable knowing that at least the equipment's there and we can start doing the work. I'm not saying that it may not need to be revisited. Any other questions?
With your med plan for a dive injury, not your slips and falls and stuff, do you guys go straight to the chamber, or do you go straight to a emergency room and get like blood gases and a doctor to talk before you're going to the chamber?
It depends on where you're located at. If you're located close enough to get to Lutheran, great. But for the most part, you're going to the closest. Is that right, Doug?
Typically, yeah.
Because, I mean,
It's gonna be, the ambulance is gonna be calling to the hospital. With everything we've got around here, pretty much Lutherans are local 101 and they have those repair capabilities, so we would most likely be one. If we were back down in Crystal Lake or something like that, again, if they were bringing an ambulance out and they might call one and be taken directly to Lutheran, that's gonna kind of be up to that transporting ambulance at that point. But it's gonna be based on their medical control with there. Here, I think just, in most cases, it's most likely they're gonna be going to Lutheran just because it's within a reasonable transport time from here, just a little level of travel. But again, it's gonna be, if it's definitely a dive injury, my recommendation would go right to Lutheran. But if it's something where you weren't sure what it was, then they may contact us.
Especially since the doctors are familiar with diving emergencies more so at Lutheran than most other hospitals, because they got experience.
and that's great that you guys bring these up. I appreciate that because, we'll take this back to our dive leaders meeting and we'll hit every one of these topics again, that you guys are bringing up, and we'll say, hey, we changed this, or should we add this, things like that, and that's surface supply stuff. So, so don't think you're beating me up too bad. I actually appreciate it. All right.
Is that Lutheran, do they have hyperbaric doctors, they staff that 24/7, or, like, I'm gonna defer to you on that one. The issue that we ran into was, after hours, that they had to call the doctors in. And for us, we have a long travel time, we have half hour plus, travel time to get there. And we used to do that, we used to just go straight to the chamber. And then what ended up happening is we go to their ER, they order a bunch of blood gases and things of that nature. I'm just wondering if you guys run into that same issue here, where it's better for us now, or where it's working, where if we get our blood gases early and get some of that stuff done, they do that doctor, the doctor will enroll.
So Josh, I think in your case with St. Luke's, our case with Lutheran, so the ER staff at both of those facilities have additional training compared to the rest of the hospitals. In my personal experience, numerous times of a few good friends in those situations, you get stuck at that local community hospital. They might not even know the number to Dan, and there's this significant delay, and that redness, it's just a rash. No, it's decompression sickness. So, in my personal opinion, go to that hospital with the chamber. If you're in Wisconsin, you go to St. Luke's. If you're here, you go to Lutheran General. We'll deal with everything else from there. But I've seen too many delays of the local community hospital not recognizing, not being trained, not being educated, and not willing to consult. My opinion.
So with any alteration to your rapid field neural from your baseline, automatic, consider divergence ready to go?
Well, he just split. Yeah, I would continue to reassess them. If you had changes between that, I would think that diver now becomes a patient, and then you need it.
So, for those of you who don't know Aaron O'Brien, he was with Lake Zurich, pensioned off there. He works for Interspiro now. Aaron, tell us your decompression sickness injury in Hawaii.
Great.
Sorry,
Come on up, Darren.
on the spot, but this is a great story about any variation of the rapid field neuros.
Dive in the Malachite crater. In the inside of the crater, it's about 60 feet. On the outer wall, it's about a 300-foot drop. So I was doing an outside wall dive, 76 feet, 12 minutes, shortness of breath. I had a sinus squeeze going down, shortness of breath, nausea, wanted to puke, started having chest pain. So I did my ascent, went up to the surface, did my safety stop, got back on the boat and just felt like crap. Figured it was just the sinus squeeze going down. Blew it off, kept going in my head. What did I do that was wrong? I didn't rapidly ascend or anything like that. I can't be bent. You know, I took med dive years ago with Todd. So what do? I get on my phone and I call Todd. Hey, I think I got bent. What should I do? Do you really think I need to go? I don't think I need to go. Talk myself out of it. Paramedic, you're your own worst nightmare. He's like, go dive again. See what happens. So, I mean, right? Yeah, it's fine. Go back down. Come up slower. See what happens.
No to the right,
buddy.
Why I'm in Illinois.
Yeah. We all get back in the boat. They go do their second dive. I blew it off. I'm drinking ginger ale, thinking that it's just something weird. Blow it off. Blew it off all day. Went back, took some Sudafed, took a nap. By the time we went and did a whale watch that afternoon, my entire right side was numb. Talked to the dive coordinator that was on the boat that day. She's like, your dive profile, you shouldn't be bent. 76 feet, 12 minutes. They pulled my computer. Everything was good. Let's call a hospital and see what happens. They said, yeah, call an ambulance. So I went from Harbor in Lahaina to Maui Memorial Medical Center. They're like, there's no way you're bent, but we're going to call University of Honolulu and see what they want to do. They're like, fly them over here. So I jump in an airplane and take a medical airplane over there, $18,000 later. I get there at midnight. I go in the chamber. They take me down. All my symptoms resolved. I bought a 5-hour dive in the chamber there. Got out, had to spend 3 days in Honolulu, and then spend another week in Maui before I was able to fly back home. On the flight back home, I had residual in my feet, so I had to find a diving dock here. Lutheran General wouldn't recompress me. I called Dan. They found me Claude Zanetti down at Swedish Covenant Hospital. He recompressed me in a monoplace chamber, which is a wound therapy chamber. So I did another 5-hour dive in a wound therapy chamber. And if you've been in Lutheran General's chamber, that's what I was compressed in Honolulu, to a monoplace chamber that's like glass tube that they pull the board out of, you lay on it, and they slide you in there in your underwear. Because you can't have it, they compress you on oxygen. And I bought a 5-hour dive there, breathing out of a regulator every 20 minutes. That wasn't designed for that. But I was recompressed there. Haven't had any issues since, other than mental not wanting to go deep anymore. There's nothing to see over 60 feet for me anymore. So.
Were you diving air or nitrox or what?
Do they have any clue why you got that at such a...
I was out drinking the night before. I was towing my ex-wife. I should have let go.
I got way too much weight on it. I got on my feet.
Hindsight's a bitch, huh?
Stress, diving into the current, towing somebody, dehydration from drinking the night before, and overexertion. Easy things that we all deal with in the fire service, right? 2 o'clock in the morning, 0 visibility, and we've been up all day before running calls. Stress, dehydration, and overexertion. Simple things that can happen here that happened to me while I was on vacation.
So, perfect segue into, let's talk about your brother getting decompression sickness.
Why did Lutheran not want to recompress you?
Because they didn't do the original dive injury. They will do emergency dive injuries, but they will not do the treatment thereafter. The doc didn't feel comfortable doing it. Now, Claude Zanetti down at Swedish Covenant was trained down in the Caribbean, and he is a diving doctor that is a wealth of knowledge that is here. So if you ever have a medical diving question, call him. Somebody had another question? Okay, my brother, we were on an operation.
Yeah, it's genetic.
It's got nothing to do with genes.
Sorry, that was my out loud voice.
All right, no worries. My brother's a cop, and I wanted to be a volunteer fireman so he could be like his little brother. So he got on Wonder Lake. He was on our dive team. He was ice diving in 10 feet of water. In McCollum Lake, we were searching for a body. Multiple dives that we did. just because we didn't have a last seen point. There was a snowmobiler that was going across at least a day or two before they discovered that he was missing. And Fox Lake went out there, his helmet was floating. They didn't see anything else but the black dot of his helmet. Fox Lake went out there, was there 2 victims, do you remember? I think there was 2 victims. And they were able to get one out, and when they went to reach to grab the other guy by the helmet, it pushed the guy underneath the ice shelf, so he just bounced underneath the ice shelf with the flotation on his helmet. So we didn't have a great last seen point, and with the airboat going back and forth, it was pushing more water, so he kept getting further and further away. Multiple dives, sinus squeeze, wasn't feeling well before he dove. Came out to rapid field neuro, and it was positive. Flew him to Lutheran General. They compressed him, and he hadn't had any problems since. They weren't decompression sickness. There's no test for it, so it's just signs and symptoms. So if your symptoms resolve, they assume that that's what you had, so you buy a 5-hour dive at that point in time. If you don't have any problems after that, you're good to go.
So, something you kind of skipped over before I brought you in the room. How long was he in the ER at IMSI before they finally agreed to send him to Lutheran?
It was 2 or 3 hours until I showed up and I talked to the ER doc and I said, you should call Dan, describe what's going on, because they just wanted to release him. They're like, you're not feeling well, go home and get some rest. And until I came in, described what decompression sickness was, and had them call Dan, they didn't know what to do. So they were just gonna cut him and go.
What part did he fail on the rapid field neuro?
He had numbness. So I can't, it was 15, 18 years ago, so I really don't remember how far it went, if it was just in his arms or his hands or what it was.
But they called me too. I think I was in Cozumel at that point.
Yeah, he probably told me that again. So just, when it comes to decompression sickness or any diving injury, we're getting older, we're not as in shape, and we have to pay attention to our bodies. If you start having chest pain, shortness of breath, it doesn't mean that you're having a MI. You could be having decompression sickness, nausea, vomiting, things like that. If you blow it off and blow it off and blow it off, you could get very sick in the long run. Don't ignore those signs and symptoms of things that happen while you're diving.
Thanks. Sorry, Dwayne, to jump in like that, but I thought that was...
No, that was great, and I hope that you're seeing that the benefit, we train monthly together, right? We go out there, we're always standing on the shore together and things like that.
Did you say the maximum depth of your brother was 10 feet?
10 feet.
Yeah.
We're going to call him Blake. It's not very deep. Yeah.
So it just goes to show you it can happen in shallow water as well.
After I got recompressed by Claude Zanetti, after my 76-foot dive that I shouldn't have gotten bent on, he said if you jump in a pool and do it wrong, you'll get bent again. He said he's had it happen because decompression sickness is not one of those things that, again, they can't diagnose it. They can't take an MRI or a CT and be like, there it is. They can find it, the coroner can find it if you get bent bad enough. We don't want to find out that.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is the benefit of us all getting together and you guys coming here is that we don't share this information on a monthly basis, but annually we can get together and share our experiences throughout the year, get people in here that have talked, that experienced this and share it with you. So I appreciate you coming.
A little briefing, and I'm going to make it super short, about Swiftwater. So last year, we had a couple close calls at the Yorkville training that we did. My fault. Right? I'm going to say my fault. I'll take that responsibility. Yeah, don't record that, Dan. You've heard me say it a few times. So a couple of the challenges were this. Some of us, our comfort zone in the water is this big. It's huge. I forget that some of us, our comfort zone is this big. So starting this year, concurrently from this year forth, if you want to go to Yorkville during the fall training that we do, which is fun, it's a kayak course. Tom and Chuck and Kevin, run their classes there. It's real life. It's engineered. It's designed. It's a little bit more significant. If you want to go there, you will have to attend one of the drills in Algonquin in the spring. So you don't make the Algonquin drills, you're not going to Yorkville. And the reason why we're doing this is what we saw in Yorkville was a lack of attention to some equipment, equipment being put on wrong, not being put in that environment before. We don't want to do that to you. Additionally, when we go to Yorkville this year, we're not going to do this crazy, scenario-based thing that I wanted to do. We're going to go and do a little bit more basic downstream V. We're going to do some tension diagonals, and it's a round-robin course that we created. I've got a video, I can show it to you later, but it's a round-robin course that you're going to do to be put into that environment. After that, and after everybody's comfortable and they're in the water, then we'll expand that. So that's your 2 or 3 minute briefing on what we're doing for Swiftwater this year. So in May, we'll be in Algonquin for 2 days, and probably October, we'll be in, September, October, we'll be in Yorkville again. All right, our next speaker is not from our division. He's a very dear friend. I've known Tom for a very long time. We work together at Flight for Life still. Are either one of us gonna quit? No. 20 plus. You're a year ahead of me. He's a year ahead of me in everything. I just was like a little dog that followed his lead.
I still have more hair.
And my wife likes you better.
That's not true. That is not true.
Anyhow, likes all of us better. So anyhow, I'd like to introduce Tom Bradkey from Naperville Fire Department. He's also a Rescue 3 instructor and co-owner of Northwest Central Water Rescue, which is a training agency that many of us use. He's the ultimate ladies' man, fine connoisseur of fine wines, rich Corinthian leather. Tom Bradkey, everybody.
Oh my God! I gotta live up to that. I gotta live up to that introduction. Holy smokes! The ladies' man, not so much. The Corinthian leather, absolutely. I'll go with that. Not a connoisseur of wine. Well, kind of connoisseur of wine, but not so much. Cigars, that's not in my ballpark just yet. Still working that way and trying to get in that direction. So, where do we start? Well, we try to start at the beginning. What we're going to talk about is urban flooding. We're going to dabble a little bit into Swiftwater. I don't want to get into a whole Swiftwater presentation simply because that's a whole other animal that gets into a whole other realm of possibilities as well as expectations and so on and so forth. So realistically, we want to try to get into this subject, talk about urban flooding, because realistically, that's what we're going to have to deal with. Because sometimes, just like it says in the slide, sometimes it rains too much, okay? You've seen the documents that have come out that talk about the 100-year floods. They talk about the 500-year floods. They say, oh, statistically, this is what's going to happen. We're going to have this 500-year flood, and it'll never happen again for 500 years, right? If you've seen those studies and you've seen those documents that have come out, there was a recent article that came out by the Miami Herald that says all that stuff we learned about and all that things we've talked about and all the stuff that the U.S. government has pushed with respect to the 100-year and 500-year floods, hold on, I know, is wrong. I know! Can you believe it? They did something wrong. I like to bring this up because, and we talk about this in our class, when we talk about the 500-year flood, we had, back in 1996, July 17th, 1996. How many people were around on July 17th, 1996? Doug, I know you were. Some of us were. I know I've been in the fire service for almost 30 years now. I've been around since July 17th, 1996. Chief Mickle was around July 17th, 1996. We're going to tap into his resource a little bit when we get into that part of the presentation. But July 17th, 1996, we had the 500-year flood in Naperville. It flooded. We had 17 inches of rain in 24 hours, right? Yes, sir. And in 17 inches of rain in 24 hours, think of it in this respect. City of Naperville, approximately 65 square miles. For every inch of rain over 1 square mile, that equates to 17 million gallons of water. There is not a water reclamation system in the country that can handle that type of water. Nowhere. So what that means is that's going to have to be what we need to deal with when we have to come across those types of incidents and how are we going to handle them. So let's talk about that. Statistically, do you agree with this? Number 2 weather-related event behind extreme heat. Okay? It used to be number 1, it's dropped to number 2. It accounts for approximately 82 deaths per year, and 50% of all flooded-related drownings are vehicle-related. So what does that mean for us? When these people drive into the flooded viaducts, what do? They panic, right? And who has to come get them? We do. So the goal of today is to make sure that we have the tools and we have the resources, we have the knowledge to execute a rescue not only efficiently, but effectively and safely, okay? 60% of these occur in the urban and suburban settings. That's what we're working in, right? Okay? 75% take place in overnight hours. This is something we're starting to dabble in with our company as far as swiftwater rescue training is going. We're starting to dabble into the fact that when do we do most of our training scenarios? When do we do most of our training? Daytime, right? Daylight hours, when it's safe, when it's comfortable, when we can see what's going on. But we need to rethink that because of this reason alone. 75% are taking place overnight. So we need to start rethinking that. We need to shut the lights off. We need to go out and work in these environments when it's dark. We need to adapt and overcome to those environments so we know what things we can utilize to our advantage, what things will work, what things won't work, okay? Here's our numbers, flooding by the numbers. So you look at the top 5, or top 4, all weather related. Look at that top one right there, convective storms being thunderstorms, 310 incidents, okay? And you move on down the line from there. So when we're talking about flood operations, what do? Well, this was back in 2013, and we were still in the infancy of swiftwater rescue flood response. We didn't have a whole lot of incidents that took place at that point in time. We had one in 1996. We had one in 2011. We had one in 2013. We learned from those things, just like we do in the fire service. We learn as we evolve, and we learn as incidents come to our doorstep, and we try to mitigate them. Okay? So back in 2013, this is what our flooding looked like in our community. Now, one thing I like to show this video, simply because, let's see if it's gonna work. Is it gonna lock on? Uh-oh. All right, who's my computer? I'm not the computer illiterate one, I'm the computer idiot one.
It's my computer.
So I'm gonna let you work on that one. Can we bring that video up? Is that possible? Should have logged that in first.
Is it a link?
It's a link, yep. I gotta go back one. There we go. Look at you.
Click on the link.
You gotta click on, so what you're saying is you gotta click on the link? Ooh.
This is that nighttime thing?
This is at nighttime. It is. Flooding in Naperville, 2013. Chuck is one of our dive team coordinators and dive team leaders. I work very closely with him, obviously, as well when we're doing this type of stuff. We've learned from these incidents. One of the things we learned is that Chuck and I are no longer allowed to go out of town in the springtime for classes. Every time we've had an incident in town, we've had a problem where we typically find ourselves outside the communities. What I want you to take from this is look at this scenario from a hazard situation. Not so much what the water's doing, but think of it from a hazard situation. Think about what we talked about. 75% of these incidents are going to happen at night. If I turn off the lights, new water polo field at the college. Now, Chief, flood mitigation tools, right? We're always about flood mitigation tools, getting boats, right? Getting things we can utilize in the water environment. You need one of these. This is flood mitigation tool at its finest right here. Just saying. All right. What's the old saying? What do you want you to do? Go out and do something. What do you want me to do? I don't know. Go do something. All right.
Hit escape.
Hit escape. There we go. Like that? I can exit out of there. I'm learning. Oh, like that? I got to bring it up to full screen? Oh, see? Computer idiot.
Just do this.
Just do that. Oh, don't go far, I got more.
That doesn't look like what you want.
Oh. That is some serious flooding for the guy to be up there. Dude.
Statistics.
Overview. Go next one there. Perfect, look at that, all right.
I'll sit here like I'm in detention.
So we're talking about self and team safety. You're going to find there are a lot of similarities in what we do in the water environment to what we do in the fire service. First off, does this look familiar? Is this how we respond to any type of emergency incident? Who's most important on the scene of that incident?
We are.
You are, right? And then who comes second? Your team, right? Because you're not the one that created the emergency, you're just there to respond to it. And the third most important individual is the victim, okay? So keep that in mind. Remember, everybody goes home at the end of the shift. We're going to find a way to make that happen. And I need to keep myself safe. I need to keep my team safe. Then, once I can assure those things, then we can go out and effect rescues if necessary, okay? When we're working around urban settings, viaducts, working around drainage ditches, I like to show this video.
This is a dramatic video out of Brazil showing a 9-year-old and his uncle being pulled under the water and sucked into a flooded storm drain.
Luckily, they survived because they shot out the road on the other side. But you can see how fast that happens. While this took place in a third world country, keep in mind, last year we had received multiple phone All right. Want to do that again? Keep in mind, during the flooding, typically when we have urban flooding, what's causing the flooding? Not only too much rain, but also think about flooding in the fall. What's clogging our drain systems? Leaves, okay? Tree branches in the springtime, okay? The problem we run into is that we have public safety departments. We are actually in the process of working with a couple different public safety agencies in the western suburbs. We had a department call us up and says, hey, we had a near miss. And this is not third world country. This is a western suburb department. They called us up and said, hey, we had a near miss this year. We want to figure out what went wrong, why it went wrong, and make sure it never happens again. I said, well, okay, let's talk about it. What happened? I said, well, we had those big floods that happened in July. And if you remember the big floods that happened in July, we had a tremendous amount of rain. Okay, we said, what happened? They said, well, what we did is we had a problem with one of our culverts in that it was a stormwater retention system, but the stormwater retention system was blocked on one end. Okay, I said, so what did you do? He said, well, we had our Department of Public Works go out there. One of the guys got in the water with waders on and started clearing the debris from the grates. I was like, for like 3 seconds, I was like, oh, okay. I said, so what happened? He said, well, when they got all the debris free from the grates, the guy got stuck up against the grates that he couldn't get off. So what did you do? I said, well, we tied our rope around him. How many people have been through swiftwater rescue already? What's the cardinal rules on ropes and water and people being tied around ropes? Never tie a rope around a rescuer, right? They tied a rope around him. By the grace of God, they were able to pull him out. They're like, we never want this to happen again. I'm thinking, I never want to hear about that again. Same thing, because it can happen just that fast, okay? And it doesn't necessarily have to be storm drain management systems and culverts, but think about in the roads that we work around, okay? Sewer covers. Water systems have enough pressure to push those sewer covers off, correct? You'll see it. Let's see if I have it in the next picture. So when you get into sewer covers, if it has enough water force to push that sewer cover off, once that system starts draining and somebody flushes the toilet, right? And that sewer cover is off, now what happens? You now have a whirlpool effect around that sewer cover. Somebody unknowingly walking around the area can get sucked right into the storm drainage system. Okay, and that's where they're gonna end up perishing. So we don't want that to happen. So make sure when we're talking about team safety, personal safety, make sure that you're wearing the personal protective equipment that you need. Safe execution is most important. This is not the time to be wearing bunker gear, because bunker gear is designed for what? Firefighting, right? It's not a dry suit, okay? People will talk to you about and tell you about use of bunker gear, because bunker gear does what? There was a study that was done about 14, 15 years ago by the Canadian Coast Guard and said bunker gear does what? It floats, right? Okay, I'll give you that. But here's the thing. What is it about bunker gear that causes it to float? Air trapped in the suit, right? So if you have a moving water environment, what happens to that air that's trapped in the suit? It's pushed out, you're gone, right? And now all you have is wet, bulky gear that's going to pull you under. Okay, so making sure you're wearing the proper protective gear. We have a battalion chief in Charlotte. We worked with their agency numerous times, and I love the saying, and Chuck has heard it a million times. Todd's probably heard it a million times. Some of you have heard it probably 1,000 times. Please, if you're showing up for my water rescue incident, make sure you're wearing a wetsuit and a dry suit. And in return, I won't show up to your structure fire in my water protective equipment. That's really what it boils down to. Be prepared, dress appropriately, okay? What do you see? Anything wrong with this picture? Okay, what are they wearing? This was actually taken about a month ago, believe it or not. When we had the big floods down south and all the big rains. This was actually taken about a month ago. So what are they wearing? Bunker gear, number one. What's this guy wearing right here? Waders. What's that going to do for him if he falls in? Okay. The average adult male weighs approximately 15 to 20 pounds in water soaking wet. Average, okay? These Stearns auto-inflates, or the Mustang auto-inflate vests, how much buoyancy do you get out of one of those? Anybody know? About 10 to 12 pounds. So now a 15-pound male in water wearing bunker gear, what's that going to do for him? Okay? And more importantly, what's in that water? Nasty stuff, right? Piranhas, goldfish, carp, all sorts of stuff. We've talked about this before numerous times because going back to our department, we learned a lot of things over the last 20 years. 1996, July 17th, 1996, we almost killed 3 members of our own department because we didn't know what we didn't know until we didn't know it. Which meant we responded to an incident of kids stuck on an island in the middle of the river. Okay, so what do? We had a dive team. Let's send the dive team out there. Great, get the dive team out there. Until the dive team gets formulated and gets out there, you have a special rescue response. You get engine companies, you get truck companies, you get ambulances coming out there. So what do? Without knowing any better, what do? They tied a rope around the biggest guy and says, all right, I need you to go out in the water and get those kids off that island and bring them back to shore. He got 10 feet into the water before the water turned him into a human anchor and threw him right to the bottom. Okay? By the grace of God, we had enough people to grab onto that rope and pull him back to shore and get him out safely. Otherwise, it would have been a bad day. So remember, when we're dealing with floodwater and swiftwater environments, never tie the rope around a rescuer because, more importantly, not only is it going to create a human anchor, but if in a panic situation, what's he going to try to do? Get away from that rope. But if he's tied to the rope, especially behind him, he's not getting out of that system. Okay? So quick release shackles if necessary. All right? Backup plans. Most important. If plan A, this is no different than what we do on the scene of a fire, right? Would you agree? Plan A, we're going to do an interior attack on the structure. We're going in with an 1 3/4 line, 2 in, 2 out. We're going to attack the fire. We've been in the building for about 15, 20, 30 minutes. Fire conditions aren't changing. If fire conditions aren't changing with our 1 3/4, 2 crews going in trying to put the fire out, what do? Get out. Add another line. Reevaluate. What's the conditions of the structure? Move on to plan B. Okay? Maybe you need to go defensive. Maybe you need to go combination. Maybe you need to go quick attack. Okay? What is our options? So make sure we have plan B, plan C, plan D. Okay? If my plan A, and for those of us that like to work in the swiftwater environment because we don't know any better, we like to get in the water and play. Okay? And that means getting out there, swimming, using the water to our advantage, and getting the victim and grabbing onto him and getting him to shore. Okay? We had Chuck, what was it, 2013 or 14 that we had those rescues? 2014, 7 rescues in 3 days. The one thing that we took from that is that, and I'm not trying to blow our horn or anything else, all I'm saying is that in those 7 rescues that we had in those 4 days, not one time did we use the same scenario or same rescue technique more than once. Adapt to the environment, adapt to the situation, adapt to what you have, and think about what your plans are. What are my resources? What do I have available to me now? What's coming in? What do I need to call for in advance? And when I call for resources, what resources are coming? Okay? Does your department or does your MABUS division have a dive box? You have a dive box, right? MABUS division has a dive box. Do you have a Swiftwater box? Do you have a flood response box? And who's on it? And what capabilities are they bringing to the table? Palatine's got that beautiful 4.7 out there, right? Are they coming with it? Who's driving it? How long is it going to take to get there? Okay? Uh-oh. There we go. Oh. There we go. We talk about the firefighters being the hero. Remember, when you're working in the swiftwater or flood environment, know what you're getting into. Sounding the floor, right? We talk about sounding the floor. Here's the thing. When you're sounding the floor, make sure you know where you're stepping and where you're walking. Don't. Ooh. A little dark, sorry about that.
I can see it fine.
Can you?
We can see it.
Parking lot. What do we have in parking lots? Drainage. Oh. All right. We're going to switch now. You're going to carry me. Don't be that guy. Because those parking embankments, right? You slip, you fall, you hit your knee on one of those parking embankments, it's going to take you out. It's going to take time. Okay, that's an injury. It could potentially be career-ending just because of something like that. So make sure you sound the floor. Make sure you know where you're walking when you're in that environment. That is serious. What is that from? Is that Tower Rescue class?
Yeah.
Chuck, you're in on that? We're going to put that down by the river?
I'm trying to adjust.
That's awesome. Where was that at?
Wilmington.
Wilmington?
Yeah. Crane.
There we go. As you saw in the flooded environment, strainers. Okay, water allowed to go through it, but you as a solid mass is not. This becomes a very real problem. May not be flood related, but maybe swiftwater related. But think about what we have from a strainer and force of water pushing against those strainers. Okay? Pay particular note to that top picture there. I'm going to show you the aftermath. Okay? Highly dangerous obstacles because it doesn't allow you to move around it. Right? You want to stay away from them. The biggest thing with the strainers, stay away from them. Okay? That's the aftermath of that same strainer you saw in the first picture. Okay? What you don't see is those are commercial weighted picnic tables. I want to say about 210, 220 pounds a piece. There were 3 of them in that tree prior to this picture. One of them ended up dropping out and ended up downstream. But just something to keep in mind from a safety factor. If you can't see this in the water, our issue then becomes it's a potential entanglement issue for us as well. Okay? Here's we talked about the sewer covers getting pushed off by force of water. Oswego High School. Okay? What's in that water? Poop. Okay? Things that are going to do damage to you if you're not wearing the proper protective equipment. Okay? Your protective equipment, as far as bunker gear, isn't going to protect you from what's in this water. Just going to go through this real quickly here. You can read through the slide. I'll let you read through that. The CDC, Kevin, Hurricane Katrina, right? Some of the incidents that we had down in Hurricane Katrina and some of the waterborne illnesses that came out of there. Okay, Chuck? We had a lot of things, and here's the biggest thing right here. Other diseases of unknown origin. We don't know where what these things are doing, where they're coming from. Houston, Texas, during the last floods, the hurricane they had in Hurricane Harvey down there last year, they ended up with 1, possibly 2 firefighters that were first response personnel that ended up with flesh-eating disease because they weren't wearing the proper protective equipment when they're in the water. So protect yourself is the biggest thing. Okay? We don't know what's coming out of them. Okay? Looters. Safety of your team. Once again, going into an environment you don't know what you're going into. When you get into these flood scenarios and they get people evacuated from their houses, a lot of people don't want to evacuate from their houses. Why? Because of looting that's taking place. Look at this right here. Okay? Shots fired at Houston firefighters and the Cajun Navy by looters in Houston Station 32's area as they were trying to effect rescues. Okay? The problem you may run into, some of these houses you may go into to effect rescue or check flooding conditions. Who's in that house? And is it the homeowner? And are they armed? Okay? So, things we need to think about. Where's my public safety personnel as far as law enforcement? Are you carrying your weapons with you when you go respond to water-related incidents? okay? Especially in flood-related type situations. Good to have it because personal protection. Down in Hurricane Katrina, right? When you're down in Hurricane Katrina, Chief, you were down in Hurricane Katrina, when you're down there with every engine company, what accompanied every engine company or every truck company that went out on a call?
Somebody with a really big gun. Multiple guns.
Or multiple guns.
In Illinois, though, we use stickers.
Right. And those seem to work. Those seem to work. This is what you're going to see, a lot of looting taking place, okay? You loot, we shoot, and no questions asked, okay? So pre-planning and incident management, 1996. And I have Chief Mickle, I'm going to tap him into as a resource right now because he was part of our management team at the time that this took place. So when we're planning for flood rescues, we have to think about what's our risk assessment, all right? Why is it happening? Where's the water going, okay? What is impacted? And what resources do I have coming in? How long are they going to take to get there, okay? Tapping into my resources. Chief, being part of the management team when we had the flooding in 1996, what were your priorities?
Priorities were multiple. As Tom alluded, this event peaked for us in the middle of the night. So these things never happen during the day when everybody's there and awake and ready to go. So we knew there was going to be some severe weather in our area. Like most people in the emergency services, we monitor those kind of weather heats. We pay attention to that. We had no idea what the true impact was going to be from this event. So in the middle of the night, I lived just several blocks from fire headquarters, and we picked up on the fact that there was a significant storm going on. We had a lot of activity that was taking place. So those of us who were in administration got called back in, and I had a department car driving down the street just like I would every day of the week, going to work. Got about 2 blocks from my house, and I could see there was water in the road, right? Don't drive through water, right? It's no big deal. It's just rain, it hasn't been that bad. So I started driving through the water, like we tell people not to do. I'll be damned if my car doesn't stall out, right? Because I had no idea how deep that water was until there was a couple of flashes of lightning. And I was like, all right, now I'm stuck here in this water. I can't even get to work because my car is stalled in the water. So I opened the door to get out of the water. Mistake number 2, right? Just flooded the entire insides of my car. Water came in, that car was shot. So I walked to a high ground, battalion chief came and picked me up, and all these things are happening rapidly. It's the middle of the night. When we have the storm-related incidents like this, we have the water-related calls, right? But what else do we have that goes on in our community at the same time? All the normal stuff that happens, right? So we've got the rain coming in. As Tom said, we had 17 inches of rain that day. And my part then was to try to work with the other administrative people to develop a plan for what we were going to do. We knew that our resources were overtaxed. There was nothing more we could do with what we had. We knew the communities around us were taxed as well. So the best option for us at that point was to bring in off-duty people. Okay, that's it was a pretty large department. In '96, I don't remember exactly how many people we had. I'm going to say we probably had 8 stations up and running at that point. A fully career department with the right number of people. So we started calling people in from home to come in and staff the reserve apparatus, staff the reserve ambulances, staff the water rescue vehicles, everything we can do with that. So I was starting to call people at home, and we have people living all over the place. There's no residency room. Guys are like, what are you talking about? It's not even raining at my house. It's like, are you kidding? I said, no, I'm not kidding. You need to come back to work. What's the challenge with that? Our community has this major flooding impact going on. This driving rain in the middle of the night, and we're bringing people from home to help with the challenges that we're having. How do those people get to work? They can't get to us, right? So that was another challenge we had. So we had, 100,000 people in the community dependent on us for services. Our resources are taxed. We try to bring in our own people to staff the reserve apparatus, and they can't get in because the community is flooded. The streets are flooded. They can't come in. So challenge number 1, we have to do the best we can with the resources we have that are available. Until we could get people to the outskirts of town, then we could finally convince public works people to come in, because that doesn't always work, right? In the middle of the night, there's not public works people around, but we could finally get some public works people in, large trucks, get them to the outskirts of town, get the people into large trucks that could traverse some of that water and get them to the firehouses where we needed them, okay? So those are some of the challenges there. Like you talk about, we started working 36-hour shifts at that point. So instead of your 24-hour shift, you'd stay for another 12. And then you'd go home at 7 o'clock in the evening. Or just stay in the firehouse if you couldn't get out.
We bring the next shift in 12 hours early, so we have 50% more staffing each day. And this lasted for 3 or 4 days, whatever it was, while we worked through this. But again, you've got the other calls that come up. You've got the routine ambulance calls, people having strokes, people having heart attacks. A woman trying to get to Edward Hospital, which is right in the center of Naperville, to have a baby. She couldn't get there. Our engine picked her up in the middle of 75th Street on the bumper of the engine and got her out of the water so she could get to the hospital to have a baby. That ended up taking her in the engine because the car couldn't make it through the water. Some of the other things you saw here that Tom was talking about is what else is happening. This is cool, right? This is really cool. Look at this. This is what I waited for my whole life from a citizen's perspective. I'm going to get in my kayak and go down the river because that's a good idea, right? The water's so high, it's moving so fast, this is going to be awesome. We had people doing that. It didn't work out well for them. It doesn't work out well for us because we've got to go rescue those people then. Because this was all thunderstorm based, we had significant challenges in Naperville with thunderstorms. A typical response, a typical day was 35 calls, give or take. When a thunderstorm would come through, for whatever reason, we could end up with 75 calls in 2 hours. It's just the way it went. In fact, I know you guys in the EFO program, the Executive Fire Officer program, I did one of the research papers on the number of lightning strikes that resulted in fires in Naperville because of the number of fires we had. Well, sure enough.
Sure, absolutely.
Sure, Sally. One of those big houses on the south end of town in the unincorporated sections gets hit by lightning. We get an attic fire in there, right? So we can see it from the center of Naperville, but we can't get to it. And we got a firehouse down there, and those guys are able to get to it. And it's a section where there's no hydrants. The ingenuity of the guy who was driving the engine that day was fantastic. They needed to get water on this fire, right? Hooks up his hard suction, drops it in the ditch next to him. He's drafting out of the flood water that's there so he can get water on the fire. You know, creativity on the part of a driver. The Blue Shirt driver did a fantastic job. But as the water started to rise, like Tom was talking about, he showed you some of those bridges. That presented a major challenge for us because the DuPage River comes right through the heart of Naperville. I know you've ever been in downtown Naperville. You know, the river walk before and all that kind of stuff. Really nice, isn't it? Probably 300 days out of the year, you can walk across the DuPage River and not get your knees wet, right? But at this point, it's up to the bridges. And it's showing you, it's washing debris up, it's washing picnic tables, large tree branches. We got to the point that the water was coming up over the bridges. And we were concerned about the structural stability of those bridges. Because how do we transport large fire apparatus across bridges that are compromised by water underneath? So we had to develop a plan then. We broke the city up into 4 quadrants, had resources to the north, south, east, and west, and had to modify our response plans, get that information up to the 911 center so we could be dispatched accordingly with both ambulances, fire suppression units, rescue resources, as well as command personnel to get that taken care of. So that took place there. Again, if you can picture in your mind, like Aurora Avenue, it's like 55th Street. You could get in a boat and go from Aurora Avenue to 75th Street, not that I did it, but you could, without a problem. I mean, that's how deep the water was. You could go. So, once again, we're going in this boat, checking out to see what the retention is like, what the flooding problem is like, and what do we find? People out there in homemade boats doing stuff they shouldn't be doing, right? The big electrical boxes that you have. This was right by my house. I go by my house to see how it's looking at my house. And there's kids that are sitting on the electrical box with their feet in the flood water because they're taking a break from riding around in the grass, right? So people do these kind of things, and this is what we inherit. Those are the kids you're going to have to go look for. A kid who gets sucked into a storm sewer like that. You have to expect those kind of things because people just do crazy things. So from an administrative standpoint, we had to get extra people in. We had to get resources. We were extremely concerned about the safety of our people operating in those conditions because this was not anything we'd ever encountered before. We were extremely concerned about the safety of the citizens. Okay? And we're still getting nuisance calls. You know, how many calls came in? I got water in my basement. Well, no kidding. You know, look outside. You know, look what's going on. But yet those people call 911, water in their basement to them is an emergency, right? So we had, did you find the flood report? Did you look for that?
Yeah.
I know somebody who wrote the flood report for 96.
Yep.
I don't want to exaggerate, but I think we had 600 calls in 3 days.
652.
There you go. All right. I mean, this was 20 years ago. That's pretty good.
Yep.
I don't remember what I did yesterday. So it's taxing. You know, try to think of these things in advance. What are you going to do if your community gets cut off? What are you going to do if you're cut off from your mutual aid resources? What are you going to do if you can't bring your off-duty people in to augment the people who are on duty already? How are you gonna modify your responses? How can you get people to your equipment so your equipment can get to the people who are in need? And what resources do you have, not for the water rescue guys, because this wasn't only a water rescue event here, right? This is all hands on deck. Everybody is a water rescue person when it comes to this. So you guys have the special training and special equipment that goes with it. Everybody that's in your firehouse has to play some role in making these things happen. So I don't know what else you want me to talk
That's
about.
perfect. That's
Again,
exactly it.
you know, the routine calls are still coming, the knucklehead things that people do. Route 59, if you can picture the Route 59 viaduct under the Burlington Northern tracks, it's probably normally 13 feet tall, whatever. I get assigned to go out there and check out the viaduct. Well, there's about probably 5 feet between the train tracks and the top of the water. And as I'm standing there, I got my car there. You know, it wasn't my car, somebody else's car had it, mine was underwater. Lights flashing, you know, people going around my car, and the guy's gonna drive through there. What are you thinking, you know? So we shut down Route 59, another big deal. Then what's the impact on the railroad? Is their bridge compromised because of all the water that's underneath it, you know? Everything that was getting washed away. So a whole lot of administrative things to consider here. Keeping your people safe, helping the people, getting your resources in, and then, yeah, I hate to bring this up, but you gotta document all this stuff too, because somebody's gonna pay for all that, you know? How does that all work? Does it get to the point where it reaches a disaster level, and you're gonna be able to reclaim some of your expenses for overtime and equipment and that type of thing? Again, that's administrative stuff, or you guys, but it's the kind of things we gotta think about.
Perfect.
Any questions about it? No?
Perfect. Nope, that's exactly what we're looking for.
All right.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. All right.
So like the chief was talking about, and then this is once again getting into our pre-planning, okay? If you can remember this acronym of TEMP, thinking about what we have, training, who's trained to what levels, okay? What equipment do we have, okay? What is our management system? How are we gonna break this system up? Once again, as the chief talked about, we cut our town into 4 sections, and each section has its own division, and that's how they ran. So using NIMS and using ICS, okay? Who's talking to who on what frequencies are you utilizing, what's going to work, what radios are going to work. As we know, Spence, Motorola systems in water, how are we doing with those? So what are we using? What's our backup? What's our resources, okay? Maybe we don't need the $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 Motorola's. I've had numerous departments call us up and said, hey, we have this idea, we want to get these nice Motorola radios, we want to go Bluetooth, we want to have headsets for the guys in the boat for when they're working in swiftwater environments and in the river. I says, yeah, but what happens if they fall in? All of a sudden there's crickets. They're like, I don't know. So maybe instead of going out and buying those $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 Motorola MTXs or whatever, maybe you just need to invest in some of those Unidins or the Cobras or the Motorolas that are waterproof and float for what, $100 a piece? And give those to the guys. Okay, let them utilize that, and then they can call back to shore, and whatever information they relate to shore, the shore people can then pass up the chain. And once again, personnel, who's coming? What towns are cut off? Who's coming in to help us? Are they gonna make it in? Okay? So planning considerations, what's our resources? Once again, where are my access and egress points? If it floods in my community, how am I gonna get my boats in the water? And where are they gonna get in the water? And how do I get them back out? And if conditions change, what's my plan B? Okay? Mutual aid, we talked about that. Victim and rescuer shelter. Where am I going to put these people? If you have firefighters that are working 24 and 36-hour shifts in the rain, in the cold, in the dark, we need someplace to rehab them, right? And if I'm doing multiple companies, where am I rehabbing them? Not to mention, once I get these victims, or what we like to call as survivors, out of the water, what are we doing with them? Hey, here you go, we got you back to land, you're on your own. You just vacated my house. Everything's in there, now what do? Who do I call? Am I calling the Red Cross? Am I calling Salvation Army? Am I calling FEMA? Who am I calling? Who's coming to help these people? Okay, taxing your resources, okay? When you get into the more specific sites, not only what's going on in your community, but your access points along your rivers, okay? What's my terrain features? Hey, I got this great boat, it's on a trailer, it's ready to go. We're gonna take it over to the boat launch, we're gonna launch it there. Well, guess what? In a flooding environment, where's that boat launch? It's gone, right? Underwater. Now, I need to think about, can I pick this boat up and carry it someplace? Because that's most likely what's going to have to happen, okay? Do I have maps of the area? GIS, utilize your GIS and mapping surfaces to your advantage, okay? Take pictures. What does my river look like on any given day? And then if the water comes up, what does it look like after 5 inches, 6 inches, 10 inches of rain? Take pictures so I can go back to those and refer to those. Hey, those things I can see now because the water level, like the chief said, DuPage River through our town, knee deep. I can see every obstacle, every obstruction, every hazard in the water. But if I bring that water level up, now what happens to all those obstructions? They're hidden, but I still need to know about it and know where they're at, okay? And what's my team response plan? As a team, who's coming in? Who's going to do what? Who are my boat operators? Okay, who are my techs? Who are my operations people? Who are my awareness people? Where can I utilize them? All right? Expect people to do the unexpected because this is going to happen, right? Now, we let this guy go through our community because he was distributing the beer, so we had no problem with that. We gave him his tetanus shot, we moved him along the river, kept him going, he was fine. All right? Once again, Chief was just talking about this. Here we go. Ironic that you were just talking about that incident on Route 59 in the viaduct, right? So here we go, live TV. So we have a reporter out there on live TV. It doesn't float well. It's right. He's more worried about the electrical system than he is the car. Huh? That's all right. Do we have volume? All right. There you go. Reporter, live reporter, standing there on shore watching this happen. And I love the response of the individual as the reporter gets out to him. Oh my God. Oh my God.
What do we do? Like, I don't want to.
Deploy water.
That's national news out there watching this and commenting as you hear. You'll see him come into the picture in just a second.
Well, they was shot as he drove in.
Okay. He can hear.
Tell him to get out.
Tell him to get out.
Dude, you gotta get out of the car. You gotta get out.
What?
Leave the car. Swim.
At least he put the wipers on.
Leave the car. Swim.
Now the reporter realizes his mistake. This guy isn't the best swimmer, right? Uh-oh. But here's the key thing. Remember, as a reporter, what's his first priority? Get the news, right? So what's he bring with him? He's got the microphone.
Yes, we're here. Yes. Hey, we can hear you. Are you okay, sir? You okay? Watch your step, sir. Get out of here. Watch your step. Did you?
The look on his face is priceless. Oh.
Walk this way.
All right. Can we
get your car?
Expect people to do the unexpected. There it is, right? It's gonna happen. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, right? All right. Who wants to be those crews? Hey, we're the National Guard. We can go anywhere with this thing until we flood it, right? Fire department, same thing. The fire department being rescued by helicopter. Oh, that's probably the Dear Chief letter I don't ever want to have to write, right? Okay. There are vehicles designed for this. There are vehicles that can go through the water. Here's the problem we find with fire department vehicles. What are the radiator fans typically made out of in a fire department vehicle? Plastic. So where does the problem come in when you're running a vehicle like this through water? You flood those systems and you break a plastic blade and it shoves it right through the radiator, right? Now we have a problem. So once again, okay, it's not my hold my beer and watch this, okay? Huh? We can skip this one, that's all right. All right, so once again, size up, okay? Where are we working? What are we doing? What's our goal? What's our objective? Are my conditions changing? Chuck, where was that department down south? Do you remember what department it was that had the grader incident? So there was a department in southern Illinois, I don't remember the name off the top of my head. They had a grader incident, flooding. The road had flooded out. Water had a flash flood situation, road had flooded out. They had an individual who was a contractor working in a grader on top of the road. He was stuck in the grader. Water was 3 feet high up to his grader. The fire department gets there like, oh my God, we got to get this guy out, right? We got to save this guy, get him out before the water washes him downstream, get him out. We're going to do whatever we can to get him out. We got our boat teams out there, we got helicopters coming. They get out there, we rescue this guy. They're not paying attention to this right here, changing conditions. They didn't watch what the water was doing. Was it going up or was it coming down? So by the time they went out and effected rescue, got him in a boat, got him back to shore, guess what? Water had dropped back down to the street level. They look back, they're like, are you kidding me? Okay, so what are my conditions doing? Are they getting better or are they getting worse? Maybe we don't need to effect rescue. They didn't need to effect rescue in that situation. Hey, hang on a second, water's dropping. Stay there, you're fine. Okay, wait for the conditions to change, all right? Thinking outside the box, right, Chief? Thinking outside the box. Houston, Texas last year, once again, all the Hurricane Harvey flooding that took place down there. House fire, and Chief talked about the house fire we had in Naperville in the unincorporated, unhydranted area. So we had to draft out of the ditch. We had 4 feet of water in a ditch on there drafting out of. Go ahead. House fire, 3 feet of water in a house fire. Problem is, what are these guys doing? They're trying to find a hydrant.
Take care, guys.
Okay? They're walking the road trying to find the hydrant. Found it. There's the engineer, found the hydrant.
Dispatched to a...
Are you kidding me?
That was surrounded by 3 foot of water. We had a little bit of difficulty, and when we initially got in here, the only thing we could do was connect hose directly to the fire hydrant, which was underwater.
Think outside the box.
Find the hydrant that was underwater.
Can you fast forward to 3 minutes?
We were able to find the hydrant and connect to it.
We were hearing a whistle and, we knew something was wrong. So we
3 minutes.
came back in here, followed the smoke, found the fire.
Got a worker. Doing a great job of protecting the exposure. Then, one of their members comes up with this brilliant, I think this was a brilliant plan. And we have these resources available to us, thinking outside the box. Okay? Dude, right? That's not a jet ski, that's a boat. They backed that boat right up to that house, and they're using the outboard motor, the prop wash off the outboard motor to put this house fire out. Is that brilliant or what? Right, I'm not sure. I don't know what the friction loss is on that, but man. All right, thank you. Multi-jurisdictional, multifaceted events, hazmats. What is this sheen on the water going to do to my equipment? What's it going to do to my dry suit seals? What's it going to do to my suit? What's it going to do to my gear? Okay, so thinking about hazmat, thinking about also in their urban environments or rural settings. Not so much. Where's Doug?
Pigs are boy.
BLTs for lunch.
He went for lunch? BLTs for lunch. 15,000 head of hog. How do you handle it?
With a grill.
With a grill. The really big grill. Doug, you guys still have farms like this up in Palatine Rural or no? Not so much anymore? Okay. Some of the rural environments, they still, Walworth County, right? Oh, yeah. You have this, right? Oh, yeah. How are you going to handle it? Pigs can swim, only until they can't swim anymore, right? 15,000 head of hogs. What they ended up doing is bringing military incinerators. That's how they handled it. Okay? Keeping in mind, make sure you decon. What are we using for decon? Okay? What type of solutions are we using for decon? I'll tell you what we use. We use Dawn dish soap, okay? Or we're also using Simple Green. What's the nice thing about using Simple Green or Dawn dish soap? Biodegradable. Whatever I rinse off the guys, I can rinse right back into the river, okay? As opposed to a bleach solution. Use Dawn or Simple Green, I can wash it right back into the river I took it out of, okay? Utilities. We talked about multiple types of incidents you're going to have at your flood responses. Okay, so maybe you're not going to have the rollover on the roof of the house. That might not be a possibility. It may be a possibility. Think about what we said in the very beginning. 75% of these incidents happen at dark, right? Or after dark or at night. So think about my boat teams going downriver or going in the floodwaters in this situation. Okay? If the lights were turned off, what do they not see? They don't see the water, they don't see that power line. And all of a sudden somebody get clotheslined by a power line. Okay? Con space, do those guys look happy? Not so much, okay? The problem with con space is bringing monitoring equipment in. Who's my hazmats? Where's my hazmatologists? Okay? Hazmatologists with the hazmat meters and the equipment. How prone is that stuff to be in water? Don't like it in there, right? So realistically, think about what are we going to do in this situation? Ventilation first, right? Because what's probably leaking in that house? Gas, right? In a confined space, okay? So once again, locate. Taking our big plan and condensing it into a smaller plan when we arrive on the scene of the incident. We locate the problem. We access or assess the incident, figure out where are my access points, how am I going to get to them? Once I get to them, stabilization. What do I need to get them out, and where are we taking them to? Okay? This is just basically our rescues as far as low priority, high priority, low risk to high risk. We talk about low risk would be the green, high risk would be the red. Okay? We talk about low risk, we talk about reaching rescues, right? Using devices to reach in a rescue situation. What do we use for reaching rescues? What do you have? Rope? Okay. Row rings, throw rings. What else? Pike poles. Okay. Who said inflatable hose? With the inflatable hoses, how many people are actually carrying inflatable hose kits on their vehicles? Do you have them on? So here's my next question. Are you have them on every vehicle? You have them on every vehicle? I'm sorry? Awesome. Okay. So for the departments that don't have hose inflation kits, I'm going to show you something that we've actually worked with that actually found out works extremely well. Believe it or not, every fire suppression vehicle that you have in your fleet has a hose inflation kit on it. And that's what it looks like. So you take a cap off the 2.5-inch port and you put it on the end of a 50-foot, 100-foot end of a 2.5-inch hose. Okay? You take your play pipe on the other end, open the bail. What we've done is take an SCBA cylinder wrapped with a towel, because what happens when you open that SCBA cylinder at full blast? What happens to it? It freezes, right? It'll typically freeze to that nozzle. So you like to have a little bit of a buffer between the nozzle and the plate pipe itself. So we put a hose there to minimize the leak, okay? Shoot that bottle, fill that hose. When you get to the point the hose is completely filled, shut the bail, tie it off. Easy, cheesy, peasy, and you don't have to go out and buy the kits. If you get the kits, fantastic, works extremely well, but this is a very viable option, okay? Helicopters, we are working currently with the National Guard right now in Illinois. We've been trying to work with them the last couple of years. What we're finding, and I know this is going on with Illinois Task Force, to try to tap into that resource, they are a little bit behind the times as far as the Midwest. Indiana already has a program in place. Wisconsin already has a program in place. State of Illinois currently has 2 hoist-equipped helicopters. We're working on training with them to get them up to speed as far as working with flood response. The key thing is making sure that what's the big issue we have with helicopters is communication, okay? Being on the same page, communicating the same thing, and training with their teams. But it can be done safely and effectively. There is a national model out there called the HART program. The HART program stands for Helicopter Aquatic Rescue Teams. The National Guard has this framework already in place, right, Kev?
Yeah, I just got the email from them yesterday. They're 2 years out.
So it's a slow process, but it's an ongoing process, but at least it's moving, right? That's the biggest thing, is at least it's moving, all right? So I know I went a little bit longer than I expected, and you probably expected, but any questions you have from me about flood response? Good? We wish we can get signs in our communities like this, right? All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time, your attention.
My name is Luke Teacher with the Elk Grove Village Fire Department. Been with them, this is my 10th year and 5 years in the dive team. I'm the assistant to the assistant dive team leader. And like Todd said, I'm presenting off the class that I took. I'm not an expert. I don't claim to be an expert. I have not done a lot of this, so the guys that were in the class, please chime in. And then the Walworth guys in the back on the law enforcement side, absolutely please add your 2 cents, because it'll just make the presentation that much better. Like I said, I'm not a cop, I'm a fireman. So before you go and do any of this, obviously consult with your local law enforcement on what they do. They may already have something in place for when they call you out. They may have SOGs, SOPs, so kind of get in a relationship with them, whether it be local, state, or county. Anything I took from the book was taken from the Dive Rescue International course taught by lead instructor Jeff Morgan, who's a San Bernardino sheriff. So the importance of why we want good evidence collection is because you never know what case you're going to be in. It's going to be a high-profile case. With the cases of these, there was a lot of mishandling of evidence, chain of custody and all of that may have gotten these guys a different sentence if stuff was done a little better, which is why, since we don't do it very often, it's important for us to train on it periodically and kind of just stay up to date on the best way to do things. In this area, it's unique for us because there's not many law enforcement dive teams except for the city. A lot of times if the police need something, they call us to go out and search for evidence. So it's kind of unique to our area. A lot of places around the country have dedicated law enforcement dive teams. It's a slow, detail-oriented process. You're not going to move fast with this. In fact, if you are moving fast, unless it's existential circumstances, it's a slow process. You may use numerous personnel. You may be county, state, federal teams, public works if you need them, other fire departments, which is why it's important to have a plan in place before an incident happens. And you can start that by creating a kit, which will kind of give just a brief slide on some supplies you can put in this evidence recovery kit. And also, it's a good idea, if you can't afford it, send a couple personnel to the class that we took. It was a couple days, a little bit of classroom and a lot in the field and a lot of just practicing this and learning the proper ways to do it. For that evidence recovery kit, obviously note-taking material, legal pads, pencils, pens, measuring devices, whether it be the laser, the big long measuring tape wheels, surveyor's wheel. GPS is a huge thing that we can have nowadays. It's really cheap, and it's very beneficial to getting exact coordinates. GoPros, we use the GoPro a lot in class. If you can afford it, you can get them pretty inexpensive nowadays, depending on the capabilities you want with the camera. Evidence collection devices, so like Pelican cases, PVC, tubes. Just maybe work with your law enforcement to see what works best, what they recommend. And if you can't afford a GoPro, digital camera. Preferably not your own digital camera. Have one purchased if you can get foreign fire to pay for one, or your department, because there is the possibility that if this gets called into question, they can ask for your phone. So when you first start off, when you're working with your local police department, limit the number of personnel who are allowed access to the area. You don't want any evidence that becomes contaminated with media or witnesses or family or bystanders. Limit the access to the people that just need to be there. Like I said, if your police department has a forensic unit like Elk Grove does, lean heavily on them, or if they have trained personnel. And like I reiterate, is they've taken way more classes and have way more experience than we do in reconstructing crime scenes, traffic accidents, things like that. So they're going to know the best way to go about it. Always document evidence as it sits. Don't move it. One thing that we were taught not to do is don't stick anything in a gun barrel like a pencil or a pen. That can affect the rifling in the barrel or leave marks that could affect evidence. Don't pick it up unless it's been documented. said, GPS measurements are the best way to go, photos and sketches, and you cannot over-document. By that, I don't mean take 1,000 pictures of a knife that's laying on the ground, but make sure you get that knife from multiple angles, or the firearm, or whatever it is you're documenting. Going into documentation, if you can afford it with personnel, use as many personnel as the scene will allow, so you can have them dedicated specific tasks. You can assign someone to sit with the IC or whoever's in charge of the scene to be a scribe, so they can take times in of the incoming units, incident numbers, things of that nature. Diver scribe is a big one that we used in class a lot. We had a person with a legal pad and a pen, and they just sat next to the comm box and they just wrote down everything that the diver and the tender were talking about, added times, added descriptions of anything that was said, which means that you may have to use one of those topside comm boxes, so we may not be able to use the headset, which in that case, if we do use the box, watch the privacy. You know, Elk Grove has a trailer we can work out of, so it gives a little privacy, but if you're working on shore, just kind of be cautious of what's being said over the box, because that audio may travel to media may pick it up, family members, bystanders may pick it up. So just be as professional as possible. Another documentation, if you have the personnel, document the terrain, have them get a general rough sketch of, if it's a body of water, get the body of water, the shoreline, if you're near homes, if you're near like streets or highways, just proper documentation with that, and always include distances to potential like last seen points. So if you're able to get a witness from a last seen point, have them stand where they were to where they think they saw it, and get distances to like opposite side of the shore, or triangulation has to do with this. I'll talk about it later in the how you start with documentation is start wide and go narrow. So as soon as you pull up, take a big picture of the scene. Take a look at the shoreline, trees, rocks, embankments, bridges, and then narrow your documentation. So it's just pretty easy. You start wide and you go narrow. Make physical attributes of the land that can't be moved. So good thing for reference points is stuff that you know is going to be there in the years to come. So like fire hydrants, large rocks, big trees, homes. Piers may or may not be, depending on if they remove the piers in the winter. If they do, it may not be a good one, because if you got to come back to that spot in the middle of winter, that pier may not be there for a reference point. So use stuff that you think is always going to be there, or a good chance of being there. And like on the previous slide, continue to document distances with all of this. You can't just stand there, draw a picture, and expect that to go. Juries and lawyers and attorneys need, reference distances, because that may play a factor into their case. When they say picture's worth 1,000 words, in this case, videos and pictures are worth 1,000,000 words. There's just some stuff that a jury in a courtroom is not going to be able to picture with words. They may, a video or a picture just may bring a whole new light to them and the conditions that you're operating in or the crime took place. GoPro is a great tool for this, especially for underwater videos and pictures. Also, too, they had mentioned in class that if you're use the GoPro underwater and zero visibility, kind of add some credence to the evidence recovery. If you're in blackout conditions and you can't get 2 inches in front of your face, the jury can watch that video and see, these divers were working in close to black water conditions. I can see how it was, might have been difficult to locate this piece of evidence or whatever we were tasked with doing. And while you're diving, to eliminate the blackout conditions or silt being stirred up, try not to disturb the bottom as much as possible. Get your neutral buoyancy. Continue the clearest water possible for good pictures. Even though our eye may pick up light and be able to see our surroundings, the GoPro may not be as good. It'll still pick up some, but not as good as what you're seeing. So use the clearest water possible and take as many good photos as possible. Example of some documentation, just a rundown, and there's by no means the final list, there's more, but when you are diving, and obviously you're not going to want to handle the firearm too much, so if you can see it and you are able to have communication with topside, start talking to them. Tell them what you see. Tell them, you know, if there's a gun loaded or unloaded, if you can tell. Is the hammer cocked or uncocked, magazine inserted or absent, safety on or off, make, model, caliber, if you think you can identify it, and photograph it and video of its orientation in the water. One of the kind of scenarios we ran through is they had a dummy military-style rifle, and the task was to see how far you could throw it in the water and to see how it lands. Does it land sitting straight up? Does it land down? Does it float for a while, and does it, you know, and kind of move as it flows, or does it sink? So that's one of those things that photographing its orientation in the water can play a part into the, you know, to witnesses or to, I guess, an attorney's case. Sketching, we can do it, but use trained PD if possible. This goes back into diagrams and distances. Start on land and then work your way of sketching the water, shoreline, then the water. Similar photography, start wide, go narrow, and use already created terrain or satellite maps. This is huge. In today's age, we have GIS, we have our Google Maps, we might have, the Park District may have terrain photos. Use that. See if you can, if you have printer capabilities on scene, print it out, and then just draw it on and be able to draw it on the map and mark your distances. Instead of having to rely on your artwork skills, use Google Maps. Use caution too when using that. I mean, you don't want to use a map that was taken in 2001, it's 2018. You know, Google usually has pretty up-to-date stuff, but if you have even more up-to-date, use the most up-to-date stuff. If you're going to draw the map of just by freehand, always include your cardinal directions, an address of the incident. GPS readings are invaluable. The person that did the drawing and any tools that you used, your incident number or call number, and always include a legend. There's not really a set thing for a legend, but whatever symbols you use in the map, make a legend of what they mean. This is one of the things for measurement. The triangulation, not going to really go into it because I'm sure most of us know what this is, but it's kind of like determining your last scene point. You have your witness, you have one witness, you have a second witness. Ask them what they saw, across the body of water, and try to hit it where it intersects. It can establish distances. Nowadays with GPS, if we can do it, we'll use GPS. Photography, like I said, start wide and go narrow. Another big evidence collection device that that Elk Grove has and many have now is the sonar. It is admissible in court. We can use them on sonar-directed dives, and if you can record throughout your entire imaging. Don't stop it and start it and stop it and start it. Just let it go, because it'll keep a record of how long you were on scene, how long the incident took. You could have, for the Northwestern rower incident with side scan, we had a couple hours worth of images that we can go back through and if you have GPS enabled on the laptop or a USB GPS, use that with the sonar. If you got points on the map that you can mark with GPS, use it. And we do a pretty good job of doing this now with just our line tenders, but if you can, have a sonar operator communicate directly with your diver. It eliminates any mistakes that may happen in between the sonar operator talking to line tender, talking to diver. Just put the sonar operator directly in line with the diver, especially if that sonar operator is also a diver. That's huge because the sonar operator knows what to expect underwater, what that guy's looking at, and how to direct him appropriately. And one thing we learned too in class, utilize your most experienced operators and divers. You don't want to have to go out of town and not know how to troubleshoot a piece of equipment or not know how to fix an issue that may arise. So if you can, use your most experienced, and if you have the personnel on scene for your less experienced, stick them with them, have them teach it, and so that they become your more experienced ones later on down the road. Couple techniques for search that we did in class. You can use a grid search, and it's just So just like a predetermined length or series of PVC pipe in squares and quadrants. You can put it on the shore, partially going into the water, document each quadrant, flip it and go down, and go on down. It's a detailed way, yet but slow way of documenting the shoreline for shell casings or whatever. Also, there's metal detectors. If you can use one on shore. Elk Grove has an underwater one that you could borrow if you need it. It doesn't work off of sound, it works off of vibration. So when you pass over a metal object underwater, it'll vibrate in your hand. So once the area has been properly secured and documented on the shore, you can start to splash your divers. Once a big thing is to use consistent and systematic approaches with each diver. Don't start out on the part of the shore and say, okay, we're sonar now, and then next diver use an arc pattern or a sweep pattern, and then switch back to sonar. If you want to set up different areas of search in different parts because you only have one sonar, you can do that, but don't be changing it up. So when you splash a diver, he's reached he's out of air, or he's reached his 20 to 30 minutes of search time, and you pull him out, have the next diver overlap his search one, and keep going, on down the line until you clear that area or you find something. If you're gonna use line tugs, they can be used, but they're not ideal for things. The best way to do is with the comm system. That way you stay in constant contact with shore, and that line tender, if experienced, can see, hey, you're getting off course a little bit, and correct them to take up more line or less line. And if the line tender, if you are going to use line tender, you should be using line tenders, I should say, but make sure they're properly trained on the procedure if evidence is found. You want them to stay in one place. You don't want your line tenders to be walking around trying to compensate for the diver, not taking up enough slack in his line. They need to stay in one place, document that location with preferably GPS. And if they find evidence or find something, the book recommends 2 overhand knots on a bite to mark the distance from that line tender to the diver. As I was saying earlier, recording during the dive with a GoPro is huge. It's just another indispensable form of evidence collection. If you can't afford that, underwater cameras, use your topside scribe with the diver, and if possible, record the audio between everybody on comms. One thing that we learned, I think all of us have learned, it's pretty common sense, is that when you are doing your search techniques, you can customize it for what you're looking for. Your search technique for a rifle or handgun is going to be different based on the amount of line you're going to let out or the kind of sweeps you're going to be doing, the size of body you're looking for. Or if you're looking for a vehicle, you might just employ a snag pattern with it. If you are looking for a weapon, be careful. The safety may be off. There may be a round in the chamber. Depending on how long the weapon's been down there, the underwater conditions may have affected it. Handle it as if it is loaded, and the best place to grip it, according to class, is right kind of where the top of the handle. You want to keep away from where the grip with the grip of the handle, because that can leave fingerprint evidence for the crime scene to use, a crime lab to use. Handle as little as possible. So when you do send your diver, and if you have one, send them down with a floating buoy. Once he finds it, or he or she finds it, they can mark it with the buoy. The buoy will go to the surface, and then that's when you can splash your backup diver to go and start taking some measurements. One technique we did in class is we had a GPS in a small Pelican case, so when we did find an object, we'd send the backup diver out, they'd go where that buoy was, and they would talk back to shore what that GPS said and get an accurate measurement. That way you're not using measuring tape and all that. You can use the GPS. They do make waterproof GPSs, that's fine as well. Have them bring out a collection device, PVC tube. In class, for the rifle we used was a big long Pelican case. We just flooded it, submerged it, and threw the gun in the Pelican case. A note about the GPS though, GPS, once you go underwater, you're not going to get an accurate reading, so get that reading on the surface, and then if it's waterproof in the Pelican case, you could dive with it. And then also too, if you have enough personnel, have extra divers in case you do have equipment issues, whether it's equalizing issues, equipment issues, descending issues, whatever it is, have them ready to go. And if you can, all divers should be on comms, the best way to go. For vehicles, the biggest thing is stabilization. If that vehicle is unstable and you don't feel comfortable working around it, don't do it. Like we've talked about earlier, the biggest thing is our safety. If we need to, we can float that vehicle to the surface, tow it in, and we can do all the evidence collecting on shore. But if you're comfortable, the vehicle's stable, and you feel like you can do it, you can do some underwater documentation. The one thing the book said, it is kind of a risky thing, but if you feel that you have the personnel and the expertise to do it, and the vehicle's on its side, they said you can pull it onto it, tow it onto its wheels by attaching tow cables and either using a boat or a tow truck offshore to ride it onto its four wheels. Like I said, it's all going to depend on your expertise and your comfort level. Visibility allows, take measurements on the interior of the vehicle. I know we talked about earlier, we don't enter the vehicles, so this is kind of just more what the book says, just relaying what can be done. If you're going to do it, start at the front grille and work around the driver's side and then go around the perimeter of the vehicle, and you're starting from low to high. So your first sweep's going to be from the tires to the top of the door. Then you're going to document from the top of the hood and the glass area, and then lastly the top of the vehicle. And if the vehicle is upside down, just reverse the process. Some things you may want to note. I know you may not want to go in the vehicle, but if you are comfortable and are trained to do it, you can get the VIN number, odometer reading, radio settings, temperature, position of seats, contents of cargo areas, what if the engine compartment's open, note any of that with either video or pictures.
Hey Luke, do you have to document most of this if they're gonna take the vehicle out of the water? I mean, they're gonna get the VIN, they know the measurements of the vehicle, odometer and all.
It's not necessary to, but it is kind of, they like to document as it sits. So if you can, do it. Like if you not feel comfortable and you just want to tow it out, use lift bags and put it out of the water, that's absolutely okay too. We can work with it on scene.
You know, whether doors are open or closed, hoods open or closed and stuff like that.
But no, you could do this on scene. If you're comfortable and the visibility allows and command determines that it's acceptable, go ahead and do it.
Get a video.
Video.
Because they said that GoPro at 4K recording is better than your naked eye underwater. So what you think you can't see underwater, you could actually see better on the video. You find out afterwards after you pull it out. So maybe not the VIN, maybe not the odometer reading, but the way the vehicle's sitting in the water, the hood's up, the trunk's up, you get all on video or on picture.
Outside of the vehicle, Ron, this will kind of go more into is the outside. So license plate, orientation, condition. You notice any paint transfer, bumper stickers, tire tread, and if the vehicle windows are up or down. All things can be documented. Like I said, this is not an end-all list. It's just some of the stuff that you can look at for documentation. One thing they did bring up is that they did say that you can pull fingerprints after a vehicle has been submerged. So if you are going to do some work around the vehicle, just be cautious around any glass, door handles, the metal around them, glass frames, plastic areas, mirrors, the gear shifter, steering wheels, because they can pull fingerprints off of them. This is from the book. This is kind of just a rundown of how to properly photograph and document a vehicle. I touched on it earlier. A big thing to note is that if you're going to give somebody a piece of equipment to use, make sure they know how to use it. Like Joe was saying, that if the person you hand the GoPro to doesn't know how to start or stop the video, take pictures, maybe we want to go a different route because it's one thing in class I had my GoPro and we just handed it expecting that everyone, might know how to use it. Not necessarily the case. You can adjust frame rate on the GoPro, you can adjust picture and image quality, kind of know how to use it. And that goes for everything. The GPS is, if you're not comfortable using the GPS, have someone show you how to use it, or maybe just have a small in-service training with your team of how to use any new equipment that you guys get.
I did say, start the video outside of the water, get yourself a surrounding view, and then it's already running for you, and it's also going to get your descent down to the victim or to the car, or whatever it is as well.
Exactly. Thank you, Randy. Another thing that we did in one of our scenarios is we did do a diver down scenario. And this was for a deceased diver. This was for a recreational diver that got caught in some intake tubing and passed away or died. So this doesn't apply to rescue mode. If there is a rescue to be made, don't worry about evidence. Just get them out of the water as quickly and efficiently as you can. This is more for if you know that the diver's been down there for a while and is deceased. Slow down. Don't let the emotions really get rampant in it. If you need to, you may need to bring in a different department, different department's dive team to help you out. Just because a lot of emotion is going to go into getting either a civilian or one of your teammates back. Handle the body with extreme care. As we were talking about earlier with a couple of the other divers, is that whenever there is, especially on the fire department side, a diver fatality, they take all that equipment and they send it off to labs to have it analyzed, to make sure that none of the equipment was at fault and to determine that if it was at fault, if it's a manufacturer error and all like that. So we don't want any evidence to get corrupted by manhandling the body or breaking the equipment. Some things we can document, and this kind of took place while we were on comms. So the diver would talk back to shore, and this is what the scribe would start writing stuff down. So the diver would just go into air pressure bypass valves, orientation, location of the mask, location of the backup regulator, any cutting devices deployed, condition of the diver's suit, any entanglements if the weights were dropped. This is just a short list. Kind of what we were taught is to just talk. Whatever you're seeing in the water, if you can see, just have a run-on sentence and just keep talking while that scribe goes. And the scribe can tell you to stop, back up, and catch up, but just keep talking about everything that you see. Because once that diver, the body's taken out of the water, it may not be in the same position or the same condition that it was under the water. So, in closing, recommendations that we came up with in class is obviously start or continue a working relationship with your local law enforcement. Have PD do a lot of the evidence, or if they want to train you a little bit on how to do it, or if if you got classes you can go to, by all means, but have police do a lot of it. Create that basic evidence recovery kit. Send a couple divers to the class. We'll start working evidence recovery drills into our dive drills. So when we throw the handgun or the BB gun into the water to go recover it or use it for sonar, maybe let's not just grab it and say I got it and surface and say I got it and it's done. Employ some of the stuff from the PowerPoint into it. Talk about where it's sitting and how it's sitting and what feet of water you in, and maybe do a little bit of the evidence recovery into the drill. And this is kind of just an idea that was thrown out there because on our last day of class, we had Jeff depose two of the members that were involved in the final diver down scenario. And he took those two guys to task. I don't know if they're in here today, but he was pretty mean to them. They're going to call into question everything from your personal, like they'll attack you personally. They'll go into how much time you have in training, is it documented training, how much expertise do you have in this and have, they really take you to task. So if you have a family member, friend, local lawyer that's willing to work with you and just kind of run you through what would happen if you're deposed for your evidence recovery, go for it. If not, maybe one of the police detectives in your area are willing to kind of run you through what to expect in a courtroom environment. Any questions?
All right, I'm Chuck Zimmerman with Palatine Fire Department, and I'm our dive team leader. Obviously, you guys have been sitting in here for a long time already, and I got great news for you and bad news for you. The bad news is there's not any real cool videos, or nobody's going to cry during this presentation. It's mostly talking about how to use the Mavis website, but the great news is when I'm done, we're almost going home. So that's where we're going to go. Part of our conversation here, Todd, the topic that was on our thing was where are we and where we're going. So, the kind of wise answer is we're in Schaumburg and we're going home as soon as we're done. The presentation here really was more talking about where we stand as a division, kind of where we're at for the year, where we were at last year, and kind of what our direction looks like in the future. So some of the common things I think that everybody's is aware of, as you've seen, and I know we have guests that are not from Division 1. Some of this is largely about where we are, so maybe a little less exciting for you. But we've made some huge strides. And as you look out there in the parking lot at equipment, this seminar, I believe, has had a lot to do with that. We've done a demo day and done presentations where we kind of do live drills and kind of show what we're all about. It gives our team members a chance to perform and show their capabilities, and it gives us a chance to perform in front of our chiefs, in front of our council, in front of whoever we invited that actually showed up. And that's starting to show its proof in the parking lot as you look at equipment. On drills, as we see people show up, and we have all advanced tremendously. The recreational scuba gear is largely gone. We have public safety gear. Surf supplied air is no longer a rare, everybody stares at it, but it's pretty much becoming common in our division, and we're fortunate for that. And for the towns that don't have all of it, they've made strides to do the beginning parts. And they have the RS4, which is the interconnector piece between where they were and what the division is doing here in the future. So we've made some great strides. All right, so there we are, where we are and where we're going. This picture was taken this past year, and we did deployment drills. There were 2 deployment drills that happened in 2017. One happened with the Cook County Swiftwater team, and we did a deployment drill meeting at the MRC in Wheeling and going through that whole process. And that was tremendously helpful for all of us that are on that team to get a good experience of what this really actually means. We have some people in here that have been deployed for military. Ron up here, Ron, you were heckling all day, so I'm gonna call you. Ron's an example of that. We're looking at certain things. Some guys have not had deployment experience, and some have had a lot. So that's where we get some of this from. And as we put that all together, I think that deployment is what makes everybody more comfortable when we actually get that phone call that we're going somewhere, that we're gonna kind of fall into line a lot better than the chaos that would exist without having some of that practice. The second part of the drill was for the division, the deployable divers. We did another drill. We did a deployment drill. And that's where this part of this kind of ended off. As we did that and went through the same process. Everybody knew the drill was going to be on a certain day, but that drill was everybody's going to respond. Whoever's going to be a part of that drill is going to go through the process. We went to the meeting place, which is Elk Grove. And then from there, we got everybody together. They did safety checks of equipment. And there were a lot of little lessons learned in those for all departments. So some of that's what we'll get into as we move here. All right, so big part of this is our website. All right, and this is not intended to make anyone feel bad about what they don't know, but for you to take this day and move on and make sure you do know where you're supposed to go. So for Division 1 members, the Division 1 website is just as you can see there, www.mavis1.org. To log into it, each department has their own unique user ID and login. And that information you should get from your department. And that's a very simple process. This is not new. We've had this for a long time. The website does get updated from time to time. But what's on there is everything that you really should know and look through. So this is not intended to be solely the team leaders or, for Todd or for Spence or for any of the other chiefs to go through. This is really for all of us as members of the division. All right, so some of the things that you're going to find on there when you go through that basic process is you go in there and you log in. Like I said, get your unique department login. It's not for each individual, but for each department. All right, Doug, I hope that's going to go away. All right. Doug's computer has more things on the homepage than my computer has on every external drive I've ever even had. So the Division I website, you should know how to get through it and how to navigate your way through it. It's not very complex that nobody can figure it out. Once you log into it, you go to your spot, you're going to see that you can move over. And on that, you're going to find a Specialty Teams tab. That's what we're specifically talking about today. Under that tab, you're going to find the six different tabs below it. A technician's log, deployment team availability, special team deployment, leader liaison contacts, resources, and meeting minutes. And we'll go through a little bit briefly of what each of those are. So your technician's log. This is where each department shift commander logs in that day and they put who's on duty. So whether you know that or not, whether you are in the car, you're a shift commander, you act in the car, or none of the above and don't know they do it, each day the shift commanders go in there and they log in. I got 6 hazmat guys, I got 3 divers, 2 TRT guys. So they log that up each day and they should track that. So at any given day, if you want to see that stuff, if you log in, you'll see who's listed on your departments, under your department is available. All right, so with that, your specialty team deployment, they'll have an update for member availability. This is where we have everybody's name who's been credentialed and rostered. So when you log into that spot and you click into it, you're going to see that all the names that are going to break down on there, and there's a way to find that out. If we were to be deployed somewhere, you're getting the phone call about deployment, that's part of the process that would be important. If you're a deployable diver, you should know how that part goes. You would need to click on that and then put whether you're available or not available. And that's going to be largely dependent on how that page comes out, whether the instructions state to go to the website and do it that way or to contact Central. So you'll be given that direction, obviously follow the direction that's there. If the direction is log into the website, this is where it's going to take you. There's another tab on there for assigning coordinators. Obviously within that, whatever the deployment's going to be, depending on the number of personnel that are going to be involved in that deployment, they'd be assigning coordinators, team leaders, and all that stuff. That's where you would click on, and those would be picked for the deployment as for each individual one. All right, so some of this stuff includes our deployment setup. So what you saw there was at first the vehicles and everything that goes. We're going to talk about a little bit of some of what's there. Once we get there, this is everything that has to be set up. For some people, we got there and we went to go put these things out, and we had a good amount of people that had never put the tents up and done all that stuff. So this is a great time for everyone to have brushed off those skills and paid attention to what has to happen. And we did take some pictures along the way. We want to be able to have this stuff there to be able to create the resource. But if we go somewhere and we get deployed somewhere, it's not going to necessarily be a nice, dry, grassy area in Busty Woods where they had just mowed the lawn for us. We're going to be looking at conditions that are less than favorable. So that's some of the stuff. All right, so as you're under the Special Team Deployment tab, this is what you're going to find. That's sort of the flow chart of how the deployment's going to go. The phone calls come in, and we had this last year, and I know that chiefs, we have all the chiefs involved in the MABUS stuff, and they were having frustration that members were directly or indirectly contacting them and asking them about the deployment, how it's going to go. So the process goes as such. If there's a deployment that needs to be, or an issue is there, it's going to come from IEMA. That works its way down. That's eventually going to make its way. The chiefs are obviously involved in it. It's going to go to Red Center, whether it goes to Northwest Central, and then to the Division I Executive Board. Their decision is going to be made then of whether they're going to accept the request or deny the request. And chiefs, do you have anything else to add about how that happens, or?
No, all I'll say is the MABUS Division I chiefs have agreed that we are going to accept all requests unless there is something going on locally that we're all aware of. So if there's nothing going on locally and our resources aren't already allocated or we think they might be shortly, we're going to accept every request. And I'm Scott Anderson from Palatine, by the way. I'm MABUS Division I president. The main thing there is the way it used to work is it would be up to me to contact all of the Division I chiefs to say, can you supply your people or not?
We took care of that in one meeting, and we just all had an agreement that our guys are always available and we're gonna go. So, everyone's a yes unless extenuating circumstances.
Okay. Yes, sure.
So for the non-Division I people here, the state plan is set up, so there's 3 levels of notifications in the MABUS system. One is the pre-notification, in which case all executive board, all 69 MABUS divisions in Illinois get notified that there's a potential incident coming. More information may be forthcoming. And then there's a second notification where your division may be tasked with sending whatever team is to the incident, stricken incident. That's a 10-minute reply back, so that's where you guys have decided we're going to just go. Right. Other divisions have a 10-minute time limit to get back to Red Center, whether or not you're going to be able to fulfill that tasking level. And then the last notification is obviously the tasking, and that's where you get the staging and all the information that goes with that.
This is Chief Kimura. So big thing for us, when I was doing this PowerPoint and putting this presentation together in the topic that was there, Chief Anderson saw the flyer for today and asked me if I would address some points. It got some of these things stirred in my head here is just as far as about deployment. I think when we look at things that we are to do, that's one area that we maybe need to continue to keep working on. So that was why I figured this is a good time to kind of review some of that. So when you log in then under special team deployment, this is what you get. We kind of discussed the flow chart there and they discussed how that operation goes. To the right are the deployable rosters. So in there, if you had selected whichever team, again, if you log into the website and you check your department on a daily basis, your shift commander updates who's on those rosters and what is there for what status you have as far as what team members are there. So if you click on any of these particular ones, then you'd find if you're obviously looking at water rescue, if you're looking at Swiftwater, tech rescue, hazmat, you would go through all those things. And there's a little tab below it that has forms. We'll get into that. Forms are located in another area as well. All right, so special team deployment for water rescue specifically, because that's what we're here talking about today. Big thing there is point of departure. These decisions have all been predetermined. And our point of departure is going to be in Elk Grove at Station 8. So that's where we are to go. That's where we're to meet. And unless you're told something different, that is always going to be the launching point of where we're going to head for that deployment. Again, predetermined. So as you click on all this stuff here, then below you're going to normally then have everybody else is there. When you get to this point, you'll have it on the screen. It's going to have all the team members that are available. And one of the other pictures there has that stuff. On the bottom, we have export to PDF and export to Excel. Andy, you're in here. So when we did the deployment drill, I know Andy was tasked with some of these things and we were doing that. And there's some logistics involved in this if you become a coordinator of the drill. Is you're going through and while your people are calling in, you got people answering the phone for you who's coming and you're updating the stuff that's coming. Big thing is going to be whether you're going to be able to export that and all that. And the drill was great because we found some logistical concerns which got worked out with a printer and all that stuff. And Todd was able to get some of those things squared away where we got those things at Station 8 where we could print off these forms. If we're sending people out, we want to be able to print off the form and hand them the stuff that they need. So we got all those kind of things addressed during that same drill. So as far as deployable assets, the trailer. So the trailer is, where everything is housed at. And the trailer is one of those things where if you're going somewhere, everything that's on this trailer, you want to become familiar with where it's at and how to use it, how to set it up, and what to do with it. And again, great part about the drill, we found some little things. We have all of this stuff. I have no idea the dollar amount. Chief Kimura could probably give us a better idea. We're talking a lot of money that's in this trailer and anywhere on our MABUS assets. And the limitation we found was batteries. We were missing AA batteries or whatever it was. So all this equipment we have to be self-sufficient and run everywhere. And in that, we were just missing 2 batteries to make the thermostat run for the tent that has the heating and cooling in it. So you can have $500,000 of equipment, but we were missing $3 worth of batteries. So the great part again about that is, we went and filled everything we needed. So now batteries and all those things have been added. We tried to figure out all the little areas that we're going to kind of fail at. And that was a simple one. All right, this one's a little harder to see, but as you click on this stuff, this is going to be the vehicles. Again, this is all predetermined that your chiefs have predetermined at the chief level, and this is what you're expected to bring. And the touching point that I want to make is you should log in and make sure you know what your department is responsible to bring on any deployment. But most importantly is that you know that you bring that equipment that you're assigned to bring. So if we start having changes, and we might have a vehicle that's out of service at a shop or whatever, that's going to happen, that's fine. Just make sure that that information goes to your team leader so your team leader can let Todd know that, hey, we're going to be without this vehicle for 3 weeks. It has a blown transmission, because that vehicle is important in our caravan to tow something or move things along. So if you can't bring something, we should know about that prior to the day we're deployed, but as soon as we know it's going to be out of service for more than a day or two. Anything else on that, Todd? Specifically, or?
Well, and know that those vehicles, those predetermined vehicles, BC Hoyt, we've inventoried them, we know the VINs, we know the fuel mileage capabilities. What else, Doug?
What kind of fuel they use, any logistical concerns that we would have during the convoy if we're going to St. Marion or something like that. So that way as they're setting up the travel plan, when they're getting all this stuff together, you can start to figure out how far we need to start planning our fuel stops. And so we can communicate that back to the state and let them know what we need, if we need any kind of support from them, or that we can be self-sufficient.
And again, some things are specifically because we know that that vehicle holds 6 people, and we're counting on that vehicle, obviously, to move personnel back and forth. So if we change to a pickup truck that has seating for 2, that's drastically changed our deployment plan. So just things to keep in mind. We need the vehicles that are predetermined to be there, and if they're not going to be, make sure you let us know that in advance, as soon as you know they're going to be unavailable, so we can find a substitute prior to being deployed. All right, so again, once we got the camp set up, this is a little more of how the camp and everything is supposed to look. Obviously, the tan-colored tent is your living tent. I got some pictures that I'll show you here of the inside of what that looks like. Again, kind of in the distance, and there's a few more pictures that'll get a little closer, but the pull vehicle. So we have a vehicle, obviously, that's been predetermined to carry the weight of the trailer that we need all our important stuff in, as well as the other tent there, which we were going to use in that case for equipment and kind of decon as guys came back from working each day, that they could be deconned before they went to living quarters and contaminated everybody. All right, so generator and lighting for HVAC. Again, we talked about the small little snag there with the batteries, but in the distance over here, it's harder to see in this green image, but that's the HVAC unit. But the lighting and stuff during the day, you'd never think that that's a big deal. Obviously, at night, we're working 24-hour rotations. That's going to become important as to who's moving in and out and what's going on. Small little things we discussed there logistically that you may not come into play, but having the generator right next to the sleeping tent, if we're working 12-hour shifts and you have an A shift and a B shift at that point, if that thing's humming and making a lot of noise right next to the sleeping tent, that may not be our best option. So we may want to have that generator more remote and longer cords to be able to power what we need up to that tent. So we came across some good things there. Hopefully it will make it better for us if we need them. Again, we discussed that. Vehicles to make sure you bring what you're committed to bring. Each piece is critical. If something's out of service, let Todd know. Inside the tent, so in the trailer, there's all these little bunk bed systems. Each one of them's got to get put together. There's just a lot of pieces, and it takes some time. We got a lot of people on deployment. Obviously, everybody get in and get working, but you build the beds and you get all the pieces together, and eventually you figure out all the stuff. Lighting goes down the top of the tent. You can see the yellow cords running around the outside. That's all part of the lighting and everything for the evening. And then the air ducting goes in the top, just keeping some heating and cooling in there. And it actually does a pretty good job. It was pretty hot out there that day, and it was reasonable temperature inside the tent. Okay, so leader, liaison, contacts. Again, these are all the tabs that are underneath your deployable stuff. So Todd and Chief Hoyt are listed under there as the leader, liaison, contact. Resources, so these are all the forms that are going to be there. You can peruse these on your own. This is going to be your checklist and your tactical worksheet and your diver forms and your assessment forms. They're all on the website. We all have them internally in our vehicles, but if you're deployed, you may need extra copies, or you may need to share these if you're going with people outside of our own division. And then the bottom part there is the team leader meeting minutes. So the team leaders meet monthly, and from each of those meetings, there's a set of minutes that are there, and it's just a generic of what we discussed. But again, that information is not top secret that you can't look at it. You're a member of the division. It's what we're talking about. That's going to contain notes. If it's going to contain equipment we're working on, drills we're planning, large events that are going to happen, and then any notes that we might have related to the SOGs or policies or anything like that. Okay, Chief Anderson in the back is the president of Mavis, we talked about some of the things. He added a few things. A big part about this in our conversation is kind of the flow chart and how that process is supposed to work. So me as a team leader for Palatine, I'm responsible for my guys on Palatine to make sure that they understand how to find the things, what they're responsible for as far as being deployed, and what to do when they are deployed. The process from there is if there's any questions that anybody has, they obviously filter through me. If it's something that I need to go beyond or whatever, then I would go to Lieutenant Richling. He then obviously would move his direction through and then goes through to Chief Anderson. Again, just keeping that flow process so that we aren't inundating the chiefs with things that we could have answered along the way and the process of just chain of command, who's doing what. Some things that everybody should look at and know is on that website, you're going to have the list of all the deployable members. That needs to be updated, and team leaders, you should be reviewing that to make sure your department has the proper guys on there. If somebody's retired from the fire department, stepped down from the dive team, no longer wants to be on the deployable roster, whatever, those things are fine. We just need to make sure that we kind of keep an eye on that and move that in a timely fashion, because those numbers on that total site are important to how we build our deployable teams and who's getting sent on the deployments. So we want to make sure we have accurate information on there. And then as far as anything that needs to be updated, same thing. Team leader, you review it. Once you find if there's something that needs to be added or deleted, it goes through to Todd. Todd then contacts Chief Anderson, and they work on getting that part squared away. Anything about that from any of you guys? No? All right. Again, so keep your chiefs informed. Big thing is, if we have something going on, for example, like this seminar, everybody obviously did a pretty good job of that. I saw a lot of chiefs here today, which is great that they were able to come out and see what we're doing. Other thing is if we have big plans going on, for example, the international conference we're talking about in October. That's good stuff. Make sure if your chiefs don't already know about that when you go back, you fill them in on that. That's going to be hosted here locally. It's a big event. It's an international event, and it's never been held in this immediate area. So that's going to mean a lot of work from everybody to pull off that big event. Anything else you want to say about that, Todd? I know we talked. There's a lot to it. All right. So your team leader should be keeping you informed on what goes on there. 2 policies. So some of this stuff Chief Wood talked about earlier today. The dive policy from the division is 420. That's our operating guideline policy statement for water rescue, and then as well the Swiftwater SOG. Those things should be reviewed on an annual basis at a minimum by every member that's on the team. It's not exciting reading, but it is what we've said we're going to do. And those things are important to make sure that we aren't going somewhere and saying, we're not going to dive anymore because it's 70 feet when our old SOG used to say that we would consider that a deep dive. Our numbers, as mentioned earlier, now is 100 feet. So it's important that we read all those. That's the guideline we're supposed to follow.
Just really quick on that, we are reformatting the SOGs. All of the special teams for Division 1 are being reformatted into a different, just a slightly different format on how the SOGs are put together. The information will be the same, but just be aware that if you go to look at it, it's something that's split into 3 or 4 different parts. It's just we're trying to streamline things a little bit and make it the same for all the special teams, so that dive looks like TRT, looks like hazmat, and just everybody's all on the same page with that.
And then we've got the QR code. So the QR code has been established. Everybody in the division should know how to do that. Scan the QR code. You can fill out the training report that you've read those. So on the Google Doc that could be accessed then by the team leaders, it should show that each member has read both of those SOGs on an annual basis. And that tracks it there as a way for us to know that those have been read and acknowledged. Some of the changes, we talked about that. Other one I didn't hear earlier mentioned, but we talked about the 100 feet already, is surf supplied air when we do a recovery. So that's something that we're going to have there. That's been instituted. If we're going to go into recovery mode, we get to the 90 minutes like Dwayne talked about earlier. Once we get to that point, we're no longer going to be diving conventional scuba. We're going to pull everybody out, regroup, put our game plan together, and dive surf supplied air. At that point, there's no reason for that urgency. We've stepped back, and now we're going to make sure safety's there. And by that point, if your town didn't have it, the division would be there where we have enough of those units available that we'd be able to control the dive that way. A few changes, kind of mentioned a little bit earlier as well, as far as call typing. The boat pack, you got to request it if you want it. That's pretty much the basic of it. It was a delay for us in Palatine to have immediately roll out on everything, and how that's going to go for most cases is you're going to respond to it. We've already got the predetermined boats that are going to be there, and if you need the boat pack, request it, and we'll get it to you. Okay, and Decon 1 was the exact same way. Other things just to keep in mind for decon is the division has the McCaw systems. So Division 1 has McCaw systems. Currently there are 2. They are on Meadows, Squad 15, and also in Mount Prospect, depending on whether you're on the west or the east side for hazmat division. So, that's things that we may need to keep in mind depending on what kind of operation we're going into. As he was talking earlier about flood areas and we have sewage in the water and all that, those would be good things for us to have. And then this is our talking point about the seminar that's coming up from the International. We've discussed it a bunch. Dates are October 22nd through the 25th. And make sure your departments, your chiefs, and everybody's aware of that.
The biggest day that we need you guys is the 23rd from about 10 till 4. We're gonna run, they asked us to run our live demo. They've seen the video, they were impressed, and they want the rest of the conference to be able to see the right way to do that. So that's what they asked us to do. After that is over, we've got Twin Lakes there will be a very large catered event there, after hours, after you're off the clock. Sponsored by one of the big corporate sponsors, so.
I talked to them, they're reserving the date, and we'll just have to stay in touch with them beyond that.
Cool. So yeah, that's our big day for Division 1. We need all of our people there to run a full deployment.
Other than that, we had the equipment outside. I know everybody had a chance to walk around if you had interest in seeing some of the vehicles. Elk Grove has their new squad out there. Our squad is relatively new, and our boat and motors are brand new. Again, assets, this is just more a couple of our guys, but found some old pictures. But assets for us, we've come a long way in the division as far as what we've got. Equipment's improving, technology's improving, safety's improving, and certainly our capabilities are improving within the division. Doug, I am pretty much ready for you. Stop the clock, separation. Chief Hoyt's up now.
Really?
That's what I
Provided everything works.
Stop the clock. This is Doug's time now.
Provided everything works the way I'm planning on it here. All right. Okay, they just asked me to say a couple of words here. What we're going to be doing coming up, and for the guys that are on the Swiftwater component in May, I'm going to be, we'll be coming out and doing some practical stuff with this. One of the things that we have to, if those of you don't know me, I'm Doug Hoyt, I'm Battalion Chief with Palatine. I'm also the Chief Liaison for Division 1. So I'm the kind of the liaison between the dive team leaders and the chiefs. And then I also am a plans team manager with the Task Force 1. The Urban Search and Rescue Task Force. One of the things we do in the plans part on the Search and Rescue Task Force is we're in charge of all the information management and mapping and things like that. One thing that we try to do is we try to maintain what they call that common operating picture. If we think about urban flooding, like Tom talked about earlier, those are big incidents. They cover a large geographical area. There's a lot of search that's involved in that. The guys from Des Plaines, you guys can talk about this probably better than I can as far as what's going on. Having to try to keep track of what's happening where and what's been searched, what hasn't been searched, anything like that. What we want to try to do is we want to be able to come up with a way to be able to track those searches that are going on. There is a standard way that's out there. This is through the Federal Urban Search and Rescue program that's through FEMA. And they use this both for large area land searches. Think about if you have a tornado or a hurricane that comes through and you've got several square miles that need to be searched. They're also using this for flooding type incidents too. So what the division has done is we've got 2, and when we need more, whatever, we figured we'd start out with 2, the Garmin GPS units. We can use these either for TRT, we can use them for water rescue, whatever. They are water resistant. They're not submersible, but if you get them out in the rain, it shouldn't destroy it or anything. And then we've loaded these up with the custom waypoints. There's 24 custom waypoints that have been developed by FEMA that are used pretty much across the country that are a standard way of doing that. What we can do with these then is, and we'll go over actually with the Swiftwater guys, this is more, like I said, just so that you know what's out there, what we're doing. We'll be able to, I have no idea what this thing is doing here. We'll be able to, we'll go over and teach everybody how to use this with doing the searches. The idea is that any structure that you search is marked on here. Any victim you encounter, any survivor you encounter.
Whether you assist them, whether you evacuate them, whether you leave them in place, whether you rescue them, whatever, all of those things are mapped on the GPS. It's usually just a series of 2 or 3 clicks on a button and you go. There's also a follow-up sheet, and again, the guys that are involved with it will get into that. And then the idea is that when you're done with whatever your search tasking is, you bring the GPS unit back to the command post or to the base, and then that gets downloaded and we create this common operating picture. I'm just going to show you real quick. This is a pretty fast process of how that goes and what it looks like, just so you get an idea. Why is this important for the street level guys? Well, we're all working on the same incident, and we're only as good as the information that we have to work with. Information is everything on these kind of incidents. So this is a program from Garmin. It's a free program called Basecamp. What we've done here is basically just taken these. I took a walk at lunchtime and picked up a bunch of waypoints on this unit. Look at that. You can see it looks pretty tight here, okay? It's spread over a little bit of area. These are just all around the building that we're in here. There's some standard icons that are out there. You know, the green one would be an intact structure. The yellow one is a structure that's been slightly damaged. The orange one is a structure that's been heavily damaged. There's also a red one for anything that's been destroyed. And then for a victim that's been evacuated, you have the E. For one that's been rescued, you have the R. We can also track where the high water points are, any hazardous materials, anything like that. If we have victims detected or victims that have been confirmed, we can put those in there as well. So what we do with this is we just take this and we'll grab this information here. And then we need to just export it into a type we can use. Okay, I don't want that anyway. And I've got a place that I'm putting this into just because I've already got this set up. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be putting this software and configuring everything into the division laptops or the tablets that we've got. So, and then there's a standard way that we name these files here again, just so that we all know what they are. Actually, say it's a recon search, and then the date. What's the date today? It's 3/16 or 3/15. And the operator and the boss. Okay, so we're just going to save that, and it saves it into a file that we can use. So we have this in this input folder here, and then there's a converter that we use that will convert this from that what's called the GPX file into a format that we can use with Google Earth. Okay. I know this is not going to be for everybody in terms of using the computer, but we do need to get a few people. If we can get some team leaders or some people that are interested in the tech end of things, or some plans guys, if we can get a few people that are familiar with what we're doing here, that will be really helpful. Now, after we've done it pulls this into the output folder. This was empty before, but it converted it into a couple of different versions. One thing that it converts it into is this KMZ file. And if I pull that back up here, I can actually drag this right into Google Earth. Okay, and it'll come on in here. And now, okay, there's a path on there that showed how I went from home this morning. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And we can keep zooming in on this. We can see, here's the building that we're in, and then this is just, I want it going around here. You can get it a little closer. Okay.
Somebody stole my truck.
Yeah, I hate when they do that. So, okay, gonna come out a little bit, but you can see if we had a whole. Here we've got, you know, this route here is blocked, so we can't get through there. Okay, we've got a victim that's been detected and a victim that's been confirmed there. We've also got this one, a little target one. That means that's a targeted search area. So if you're on the search team and you come across a place where, yeah, we've got a number of hits for victims here, but because this area that we're at, we can't search it right now, or it's just a recon, and all we're doing is we're just trying to get through fast, but we want to make sure that this area gets searched really carefully. You can mark that down as a targeted search area. We can put in landing zones if we've got an area where we can move aircraft in and out. Again, you know, would be a damaged structure with a hazardous material there. We can mark, these would be the high water marks. So that's where the high water is at right now. And then so if you think about it, if we're doing a primary or a recon search through, and then you go back and do a primary later, and you see your water mark has changed, is it getting better, is it getting worse, where are we headed with this incident? The ROB for a rescued victim, and again, I think there's another waypoint underneath there. So you can see, right, if we click on that, we actually have a damaged structure with one victim that's been rescued and then 2 that have been confirmed in that area. So you can potentially have more than one thing right on a spot. Again, this is just kind of a quick overview on it, but the whole idea is that we could take this KMZ file and we could email this back to an EOC. We could email it if the state has their operating center up and running, we can email it down to them. So that way anybody who is trying to keep track of what this incident looks like can have this, they can drag it all into one common map and be able to look at what's been done. We can tell you know, how many, if we have 4 or 5 teams, we can load all theirs in and put all of them into here. One of the things that we'll do in the process of setting this up is we'll actually have different colors for the different tracks, if it's a recon search versus a primary versus a low secondary, whatever. So there's just a lot of things that we can do. We'll be rolling out the GPSs at the Swiftwater training in May. Just want to kind of give everybody an overview of where we're going with this and why it's important. So yeah.
What's the accuracy on this GPS?
It's looking at this here, it depends on satellite coverage and things, but I'm guessing we're probably within 2 meters.
You get, like today, you get a real clear day.
Yeah, I'm thinking today, I'm guessing this is probably with it.
Good handheld unit with a good antenna, you can get down to a half foot to a foot.
Yeah.
You know, it just depends on how many satellites you acquire. You start getting 6, 7 satellites, you're gonna be really happy.
Yeah. I'm guessing with this here, just looking at where these are and considering where I went, I'm guessing these are within a meter. So, but again, I just did this at lunch. It's pretty quick. The units are very intuitive. The other thing that we did get on these units is they have cameras built in with, it'll actually geotag the location on the pictures. So eventually what we'll be able to do is not only be able to mark, okay, here's a damaged structure, we can take a picture of it, and then that can also be imported into Google Earth, so that way you can just click on that icon, not only see this is that structure, but this is what it looks like. So if we need to try to figure out what kind of resources we need to get out there to follow up with, it gives us a better idea. Yeah, question in the back?
Do they have any like app for a smartphone where you can use those as well?
There is one out there right now, and this is something that's probably a few years away for most of us, but most of the high-level GIS people are using ArcGIS or Esri, or it's all part of ArcGIS. That's kind of the high-end GPS thing. There is a GPS era, a phone app called Collector, where you can do that. And if you have connectivity, it will actually auto-populate any map that you have access to. We don't have that right now. Big problem is it's an extremely expensive program if you don't have it. So like Mavis, Illinois, I think only has like 1 or 2 licenses for this. So eventually, that's something that we'd like to go to. This is the current standard that's out there, but actually the Missouri Task Force 1 is the Missouri Urban Search Rescue Task Force. They have really led the way in a lot of the large area search mapping, and I know that's something that they're working with right now. Actually had a chance to go down and watch one of their training sessions, and they were taking us through how they're doing it. It's amazing what they can do with that. You'll just literally be watching if you have that map up, And as they're doing it, it's popping on there as they're doing the searches. So it's in real time, you can see what's going on. It's you know, probably still a few years away for us, but it's definitely something that's coming up. Any other questions? Like I said, I know not everybody is going to be interested, able, whatever, to be able to do some of the stuff on this. We're going to have everything configured so that way there's nothing you really have to do other than just inputting some data. But we will need to get a few people who are at least interested and capable of doing that up and running on how to do that. Because the more we can get that done, it's obviously going to make life a whole lot easier. So, okay, that's all that I've got. So again, thank you everybody for coming out. We'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Chuck. So before we do those last raffles, Chief Anderson, thank you and all the other chiefs in the division for the constant support. Our sponsors here, all of our team leaders, Wayne, Doug, Brian, Andy, Luke, Chuck, Dan, who am I missing? Aaron, where's Aaron? Is that everybody? So without all their help, this wouldn't actually get put on. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll keep doing this as long as we can. We are, instead of bringing in people from outside the state or this area, we'd rather keep it local. So if you have interest in presenting something, our Wisconsin buddies, Sheriff's Department wise, if you want to sponsor or present something here that you think would be beneficial, man, holler to us, because I think we're burning the candle at both ends for some of us. So to get fresh faces up here is a good thing. There's a lot of good information. This division is extremely benefited with state-of-the-art equipment and the funding and the support. So that's huge, huge.